The Mountain and the Monster. Lumion awoke to a world cloaked in a faint gray fog. The air felt heavy, pregnant with an unnatural stillness. He swung out of bed and strode to the window, his eyes drawn to the mountain looming in the wilderness beyond. The mountain, though modest in height, barely 20 or 30 meters tall, exuded an imposing presence. Its reddish-brown soil and jagged stones seemed to stretch endlessly upward, as if piercing the heavens themselves. Beneath its shadow, the ruins of dilapidated structures sprawled in chaotic layers, encircling the desolate landscape like forgotten memories. Lumion's gaze lingered on the wilderness and ruins. His thoughts sharpened, honing in on his adversary, the monster wielding a shotgun. Judging by its build, it's highly skilled in running and jumping. It has a degree of intelligence, enough to use a complex weapon like a shotgun. And its tracking abilities, they're extraordinary. It might even have powers akin to Aurora's. The thought chilled him. His chances of survival in a direct confrontation were slim, perhaps 10%. His special trait, meditation, was a double-edged sword. While it could enhance his abilities, it also pushed him to the brink of death, leaving him vulnerable to even the slightest misstep. Sneak attacks were out of the question. The creature's uncanny tracking abilities made stealth nearly impossible. And without a ranged weapon like a revolver, he had no way to strike from afar. After 2 days of relentless strategizing, a plan began to take shape: traps. A hunter's advantage. Lumion's experience hunting in the mountains with the village hunters had taught him the art of setting traps. He was adept at using his knowledge to create mischief, but now, it would serve a far more serious purpose. Initially, he considered an oil-based trap. He imagined drenching the monster with oil from a rigged bucket and igniting it with a torch. However, the plan was too risky. The creature's heightened senses would likely detect the oil's scent, and masking it might only arouse suspicion. Instead, Lumion decided on a simpler solution: a pit trap lined with stakes. The challenge was clear. The monster might notice the trap and avoid it, but Lumion believed he could exploit its blind spots and lower its guard. His weapons were inferior, but his intelligence could turn the tide. At least it's not a genius, Lumion reassured himself. Then with a smirk he amended, but I'll assume it's as cunning as Pons Bene. No, that guy's dumber than rocks. Let's say it's an uneducated padre. That seems fair. The setup. Lumion scanned the wilderness beyond his house. It was too exposed, offering no cover for an ambush. He would have to venture into the ruins. It's fine to dig a trap, Lumion muttered to himself, but if I use myself as bait, it'll just shoot me from a distance. His thoughts crystallized as he chose his location, a relatively wide crevice in the ruins. It would require some modification, but it saved him valuable time. With his plan set, Lumion prepared for the task ahead. He lashed hardbound books to his chest and back with rope, creating makeshift paper armor. It wouldn't stop a shotgun blast entirely, but it might save his life. Satisfied with his makeshift defenses, he donned his leather jacket, grabbed his tools, and stepped into the fog, crafting the trap. The mountain loomed in the distance, its peak tinged with blood-red hues. Lumion made his way to the ruins, his footsteps eerily muffled by the fog. He chose a secluded corner of a collapsed building to stash his tools, and ventured deeper into the ruins, scouting for the perfect spot to set his trap. He found it, a crevice wide enough to modify into a deadly pit. Lumion worked quickly, digging out the earth and embedding jagged stakes into the base. He fashioned a net from ropes, draping it over the pit before covering it with soil to disguise the trap. As he finished, Lumion considered the creature's intelligence. If it senses the trap, it'll probably avoid it and leap over. But where will it land? He measured the distance carefully, selecting a nearby spot to set a second trap. This one was simpler, a pit designed for a normal human. Lumion banked on the creature's overconfidence. The waiting game. With the traps complete, Lumion stowed his tools and retreated to a relatively intact wall near the first trap. He squatted there, his heart pounding in his chest, and waited. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional whisper of wind through the ruins. Lumion tried to steady his nerves, taking deep, deliberate breaths. Breathe in, breathe out. But his anxiety refused to abate. His heart raced, each beat a drumroll of anticipation. He couldn't help but long for the monster's arrival, if only to end the torturous wait. I can't burden Aurora with my fears, he reminded himself. Focusing on that thought, he began to meditate. The crimson sun emerged in his mind's eye, its burning presence steadying him. He clung to it, finding a semblance of calm. Yet beneath the surface, fear lingered like a shadow. The rustling. Suddenly, a faint rustling sound reached his ears. Lumion froze, his senses on high alert. The sound was subtle, like a shepherd moving cautiously through a hidden pasture. The monster was near. Lumion's grip tightened around the axe in his hand. He suppressed the urge to act impulsively, knowing that patience was his greatest weapon now. His traps were set, and his resolve was firm. Whatever happened next, Lumion knew he had done everything in his power to prepare. And then he waited. A heavy decision. Lumion stared at the partially restored request for help, his mind racing. The words he had pieced together weren't necessarily the original message. Different combinations could form phrases like, "The people around us need help as soon as possible." "We are getting weirder," especially if grammar was ignored. Still, the weight of it pressed heavily on him. In the past, he might have dismissed it as a cruel prank, but too much strangeness had taken root in Cordu. And those were just the abnormalities he could see. "I can't pretend nothing is happening, not anymore." Lumion recalled Aurora's advice. A person with a sound heart and mind knows when to avoid danger. You don't stand under a wall when you see it about to collapse. That settled it. He couldn't stay in Cordu any longer, not with the growing sense of unease. He had to leave with Aurora, and they had to leave now. The authorities would handle the village's abnormalities. Protecting the villagers wasn't his duty, and he lacked the capability. But if they left, he needed to be prepared. The dream ruins held the promise of power, and he had to explore them further, urgently. Only by becoming stronger could he protect his sister from whatever might erupt before their escape. With his resolve firm, Lumion carefully returned the lever blue to its rightful place. He picked up the torn piece of paper, strode to the stove, and tossed it into the flames. The words burned quickly, curling into ash as the fire consumed them. Outside, Lumion wasted no time heading to Oel Tavern. But as he approached, he found the doors tightly shut. A clear sign that Maurice Binet, the owner and bartender, had gone to Naroka's funeral. Still, Lumion knew the tavern, which doubled as a motel, wouldn't lock every door during the day. He circled around to a side trail and slipped in through the back. Once inside, he ascended the stairs, his footsteps echoing softly. He reached the enigmatic woman's room, pausing in front of the door. His eyes flicked to the doorknob, searching for any "do not disturb" sign. Finding none, he rapped lightly. Knock. 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 Silence. Frowning, Lumion knocked again, harder this time. Knock. 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 Still no response. "Not here," he murmured. Had she gone to the funeral too? Without hesitation, he turned and hurried out of the inn. His path led him toward the cemetery beside the cathedral, where the funeral procession would end. Along the way, he passed Naroka's house. The mourners had dispersed, moving toward the cemetery, leaving the house locked. Lumion's gaze lingered on the building until movement caught his eye. Emerging from the house was Pons Binet, the Padre's younger brother. Lumion's heart skipped a beat. Wasn't it forbidden to enter the house of the deceased? The superstition was clear. Doing so risked harming the family's fortune. Pons exchanged a brief word with Arnaud André, Naroka's youngest son, before walking away. Something's wrong, Lumion thought, leaning against a nearby wall to remain inconspicuous. He pieced together a grim possibility. Naroka's death might not have been the owl's doing, but the result of something far darker. Perhaps connected to the Padres group. Or worse, what if the owl and the Padres group are working together? His thoughts churned as he continued toward the cemetery. He decided he'd share his suspicions with Ryan, Leah, and their group. Hopefully, they could uncover the truth and put an end to the growing menace in Cordu. An uneasy conversation. Later that evening, back in their semi-subterranean home, Aurora turned to Lumion, her tone brisk. "Where's your script? Let me see it." Lumion shook his head, his expression unusually serious. "I have something more important to tell you." Aurora narrowed her eyes. Did a wild animal chew through it again? No, Lumion replied quietly. This is about Cordu. Her teasing smile faded. Go on. Lumion explained everything. Ryan and the others' investigations, the letter, the lever blue, and his suspicions about Madame Pualis. Finally he made his plea. We need to leave. Now. We can go to Dirige or even Bigor. Anywhere but here. Aurora considered his words for a long moment. This is the right choice, she admitted. But leaving abruptly could make us a target. If the authorities are investigating, fleeing would draw attention. And if they find out you're an unregistered beyonder, the Inquisition will cleanse you. Lumion's stomach turned at the thought. Then what do we do? Aurora's gaze sharpened. We leave with a plausible excuse. Something ordinary. She smiled faintly. Tomorrow, you'll go to the administrator's office and send a telegram to Novel Weekly. Ask when their next author salon is. Why? Novel Weekly has been pestering me to attend their salons in Trier. I've always refused, but if I accept now they'll be thrilled. They'll even reimburse our train tickets. To anyone watching, our departure will look like an ordinary trip. By the time they realize we'll be long gone. Lumion breathed a sigh of relief. His sister's quick thinking eased some of his tension. All right. I'll handle it, he said. Before he could leave, a question crossed his mind. Aurora. Grande, sir. Is a beyonder just someone with superpowers? Yes, she replied simply. Then with a sly smile she added, so you're abandoning your friends to save yourself? Lumion snorted. I don't see how that's my problem. Aurora chuckled, shaking her head. You always say that, but you never follow through. You'll either warn them or quietly help them. You're predictable, little brother. Lumion grumbled but didn't argue. He knew she was right mostly. All right, enough. It's your turn to cook tonight, Aurora said, shooing him toward the stove. A restless night. Later, as darkness enveloped the village, Lumion lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The crimson moon was obscured by thick clouds, adding to the unease gnawing at him. Aurora's plan was clever, but waiting for Novel Weekly's response felt risky. The village's abnormalities could erupt at any moment. I need to become stronger. The dream ruins held the key, and Lumion resolved to venture deeper into their mysteries, even without guidance from the enigmatic woman. As his thoughts settled, Lumion closed his eyes and drifted into a fitful sleep, ready to face whatever the night would bring.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Lumion's senses were on high alert. He wasn't as scared as before now that things were finally happening. Despite his body still quivering, he felt more in control and less likely to collapse. I should have died 5 years ago. It's all thanks to Aurora that I'm still alive. These past 5 years were a free lunch. What's there to be afraid of? Lumion muttered to himself, gritting his teeth and mustering up courage. In the blink of an eye, the already dim light illuminating the first trap's surface grew even fainter. A shadowy figure emerged, blocking the light that pierced through the dense fog in the sky. The figure loomed in the distance, a hulking beast with blood-red eyes and greasy black hair. Half human and half beast, it was armed with a shotgun on its back, ready for anything. Its front knees bent as it surveyed the ground before it. A moment later, the beast, wearing a dark jacket and muddy pants, removed its shotgun and jumped, controlling the vertical extent of its jump to leap over the trap and land on the solid, cracked ground. It turned its greasy black-haired head and saw a slight movement. Then, the monster spotted Lumion, who had a panicked expression and was trying to hide behind a wall. With a low growl, the beast jumped up high again and pounced on its target. It landed a slight distance away from where Lumion had been, to prevent him from turning around and dealing a fatal blow before it could stabilize itself. Lumion fumbled his way around the wall, disappearing from view. As soon as the monster landed, the soil beneath its feet gave way, and it plummeted along with the dirt and rope net into a deep pit that had suddenly appeared. Thud! The sound of something heavy crashing to the ground echoed through the abandoned building, accompanied by a screech resembling that of a rat. Lumion, who had concealed himself behind the wall, couldn't suppress the thrill surging through him upon witnessing the sight. The first step had been accomplished. With most of his fear evaporating, He seized the pitchfork by his side and dashed towards the trap. The skinless monster's formidable tenacity had left an indelible impression on Lumion. Moreover, his quarry had a shotgun, so he refrained from exposing himself above the deep hole. Instead, he aimed the pitchfork from a distance and thrust it into the pit. In a sudden turn of events, the pitchfork plunged and halted abruptly. Immediately, an intense force reverberated through the pitchfork, yanking Lumion into the trap with brute force. Caught off guard, Lumion tumbled forward. He didn't bother inspecting the pit's bottom. Discarding the pitchfork, he spun around and lunged towards the still-standing wall. Bang! The impact hit Lumion like a freight train, knocking him off his feet. Blood, with a distinct metallic taste, surged up in his throat. With a thud, he hit the ground, tumbling a few times before he regained his footing. In the same instant, he caught sight of the monstrous creature, part human, part beast, emerging from the deep pit. It held a single-barreled shotgun in its hand, its body torn open, revealing a grotesque display of wounds. A sickening mixture of dark red and pale yellow liquid poured out, as its insides spilled out. Despite being badly injured by Lumion's trap, the creature had not lost its ability to fight. As it tumbled into the pit, it managed to contort its body, just enough to avoid a fatal blow. The creature's legs and arms were also still functional, allowing it to break free from the trap. Without a moment's hesitation, Lumion bolted for the ruins nearby. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. He had a plan in mind. He knew there was a chance the trap wouldn't completely incapacitate the monster, leaving it with enough strength to fight back. In the event that the trap failed, Lumion's contingency plan was to use the environment to his advantage. He'd play a game of cat and mouse, buying time for the beast to succumb to its wounds. Its reaction time and strength would weaken considerably, and Lumion could strike when the opportunity presented itself. Bang! Another shot rang out, followed by the sound of soil splattering, as leads appeared at the spot where Lumion had been standing. He quickly took cover behind a half-collapsed wall, and crawled on all fours to the other side of the ruins. Suddenly, he heard the sound of wind blowing in the air. The monster had jumped over. Lumion swiftly pivoted and crawled back behind the half-collapsed wall through a gap. He made the most of the special conditions of the collapsed buildings, hiding at times and circling around at others, dodging the monster's attacks without engaging in a direct fight. Hide-and-seek was Lumion's forte, honed through past pranks where he used this innate ability to escape getting beaten up on the spot. As the cat-and-mouse game continued, Lumion gradually found himself panting, while the monster's running speed, jumping height, strength, and reaction speed had clearly weakened. Just a little longer, just a little longer. I still can't defeat it now. Lumion retreated back to his previous location, leaning against the half-collapsed wall, and trying to control his urge to immediately counterattack. Bang! Suddenly, he felt a massive blow to his back, sending him flying forward. The half-collapsed wall and rocks behind him exploded into a million pieces, raining down around him as he crashed to the ground. The monster hadn't chased after him, instead choosing to body slam into the obstacles in its way. The already shaky half-collapsed wall couldn't withstand the brunt of its full force, and collapsed completely. Crimson blood gushed out of the creature's wounds, pooling on the ground in a grotesque display. Despite being caught off guard, Lumion's reflexes were quick. He rolled out of harm's way and sought cover behind a pile of rubble. Bang! The monster's shotgun blast missed him by a hair's breadth. Having slammed into the wall, the monster struggled to regain its footing. It fumbled with the cloth bag strapped to its waist, only to find it empty. With a snarl, it hurled the shotgun aside and lunged at Lumion. Lumion had already darted to a new hiding spot for a continued game of cat and mouse. Of course, he couldn't keep up this game forever. The monster might slip away if he waited too long, and the noise could attract others of its kind. As he circled around the area, he noticed that the monster seemed to be slowing down. Here's the chance. With a quick decision, Lumion pretended to make an escape towards a collapsed building. Once there, he stood firm, drew his axe from his back, and took a moment to catch his breath. In a flash, the monster rounded the corner and stood in front of Lumion. Without hesitation, Lumion raised his axe and charged forward. He stepped towards the creature, turning his body sideways and lowering his shoulder. He planned to body slam the monster, a move his sister had taught him, and then slash at its neck. Bam! Lumion took a step forward, leaning his body against the monster's chest, but the creature didn't budge. Lumion was surprised by its unyielding stance. He tried to push harder, but the monster remained like a thick wall. What? Lumion's heart tightened, and he bounced back. He was about to pounce to the ground and try to escape the monster's attack range. In a flash, the monster lunged forward and clutched Lumion's neck in a death grip. It didn't look like it was having trouble moving at all. Lumion gasped in shock as he was hoisted into the air, his neck throbbing with pain. "Sacreblue, I've been tricked," he exclaimed, his mind reeling. A creaking sound filled the air, and the world spun around him, making his head swim. His axe had missed its target, and was now knocked off to the side. Lumion finally realized that he had been outsmarted by the monster. Despite being in dire straits, the creature had enough strength to fight. It had cunningly faked weakness, luring him into attacking instead of staying hidden. Lumion had underestimated its combat intelligence, and now he found himself in a desperate situation. The monster was clearly at the end of its rope, as evidenced by its inability to snap Lumion's neck. But this was just a temporary respite. The creature still had enough energy left to finish the job. As his neck threatened to snap, and his breathing grew more ragged, Lumion felt his mind begin to go blank. Blank. As Lumion teetered on the brink of death, the lady's words suddenly resurfaced in his mind. She wanted him to use what's special about him in the dream. Special trait. His thoughts were nearly blank, and so he quickly seized the opportunity to meditate. The red sun instantly appeared in his mind. Unlike his previous attempt at meditation to calm his emotions, where the sun disappeared as soon as it was formed, this time he focused on keeping it in existence. Suddenly, a voice from above, infinitely high, pierced his skull. The pain was excruciating, and Lumion felt as though his heart might burst from his chest. He forgot about the monster's vice grip on his neck, and the fact that he was struggling to breathe. Suddenly, he fell to the ground with a sickening thud. The strange sound that had accompanied his meditation disappeared, but the pain remained, almost unbearable. He was unable to take stock of his surroundings, or even assess the damage done to his body. After an unknown amount of time, the near-death sensation subsided. Lumion didn't bother checking his neck. Instead, he placed his hands on the ground and lifted his head. The beast was squatting nearby, half human and half beast, with its head drooping and its arms outstretched in front of it. Lumion noticed its wounds still seeping with blood mixed with a yellow liquid, and the creature's body quivered uncontrollably. "What's wrong with it? Was it scared silly by the specialness I displayed?" He picked up his fallen axe and took a step towards the monster. Without hesitation, he held the axe with both hands and swung it at the back of the beast's neck. The axe sank deeply into the creature's muscles and came to a halt at its bones. Lumion used all his strength to remove the axe, then continued his assault, slashing at the monster's neck once, twice, thrice. Finally, the beast's head detached from its body with a sickening splash, rolling to the side. The body held on for a moment longer, barely clinging to life. No resistance, just trembles. And then, with a sudden jerk, Lumion's body contorted, his hands releasing their tight grip, letting the bloodied axe slide down with a sickening squelch. Huff, puff, huff. He could finally catch his breath. Lumion didn't have the luxury of resting for too long. He had to keep moving, for fear that other monsters might come. After taking a moment to catch his breath, he endured the pain in his neck and back, and slowly approached the monster's corpse. He held the axe tightly in his right hand, ready to strike again if the creature wasn't fully dead. After cautiously searching the body with his left hand, he found 3 copper coins called lick and an empty cloth bag. "That's it," Lumion muttered to himself, disappointed that he hadn't found anything related to superpowers. If it wasn't for that, would he have risked his life fighting this monster? If Lumion wasn't special in the dream, he would have been nothing more than the monster's meal. He propped himself up and looked towards the shotgun monster's head that had rolled to the side, praying that what he was searching for was there. In that moment, a deep crimson glow materialized over the monster's body. They resembled fireflies, gradually converging towards a single spot in an unyielding fashion. Lumion gawked in disbelief, as a sense of elation began to well up inside of him. This phenomenon had to be connected to superpowers. Without much delay, a sticky dark red substance materialized on the monster's chest, and no additional light specks came into view. Lumion cautiously crouched down and made a grab for the blob. It was incredibly slippery, slipping through his grasp twice before he finally managed to hold it in his palm. It's remarkably lightweight, yet possesses a certain texture and elasticity. The surface feels as smooth as glass. What the hell is this? Lumion muttered to himself, realizing once more that he was completely illiterate when it came to matters of the mystical. In the midst of hushed whispers, Lumion caught a whiff of something strange and dark red that reeked of blood. His impatience grew, and an indescribable malice took over his body. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to raise his axe and hack at the monster's corpse until his violent emotions were spent. But Aurora's warning about the dangers of pursuing superpowers echoed in his mind, and he quickly reined in his impulses. He had taken precautions to monitor himself and remain vigilant at all times, and he wouldn't let his guard down now. It affects my mind. Lumion tossed the dark red blob into the cloth bag he had found on the monster. The moment he lost contact with it, he felt a wave of calm wash over him, dissipating the remaining excitement of the deathmatch. His body still trembled slightly, but he was back in control. As expected, Lumion whispered happily as he returned to his senses. He tied the cloth bag tightly and secured it to his belt buckle. After a moment's consideration, Lumion withdrew the cloth bag and stowed it safely in the inner pocket of his leather jacket. It provided him a sense of assurance and minimized the chances of losing it. As the buttons on his clothes were undone, the book that had been plastered to Lumion's back lost its support and hit the ground. It was riddled with potholes and in tatters, a far cry from its former state. Lumion recognized it as the mock examination papers for higher education admission exercise book that his sister Aurora had prepared for him. The cover was soft, and the book covered a wide area when opened. It could be used as an outer layer protection and fill in any gaps. Today it had saved his life by blocking a shotgun attack. Of course, this single book didn't deserve all the credit. Lumion picked up the exercise book and sauntered back to the monster's lifeless body, a wry smile on his face. "See, knowledge is indeed power," he said, intending to throw it at the monster's face. But then he hesitated, recalling the countless hours Aurora had spent writing it. He couldn't bring himself to toss it away. Instead, he tucked the exercise book into his belt, dragged the monster's corpse to the trap, and flung it inside. Lumion kicked the monster's head for good measure. With the battlefield cleared, Lumion gathered his tools, including the empty shotgun, his pitchfork, and shovel, and retreated into the wilderness. He looked over his shoulder as he walked, ever vigilant. Eventually, he made it back to his house, climbed the stairs, and entered his bedroom. It was only then that he truly relaxed. The agony that had been gnawing at his body, the obvious discomfort, and the overwhelming exhaustion all erupted at once. He slumped down on the bed, taking a moment to recover. But he didn't want to sleep just yet. He needed to assess the damage. Lumion stripped off his clothes and walked over to the wardrobe, checking himself out in the full-body mirror. His neck was swollen, and the 5 bloody finger marks on it had turned an ominous shade of bluish-black. His back was bruised, and there were countless scrapes and cuts all over his body. "Even some of my injuries are internal, just like Aurora had warned me. I wonder if I'll recover by the next time I come in?" He couldn't help but reflect on the battle. It was a failure, but not a total failure. In the first half of the battle, he gave himself a pat on the back. Not only did he make full use of the monster's low IQ to lead it into the second trap, but he also followed his original plan to a T. It was a game of cat and mouse, and he played it to perfection. He dragged the monster out until it was on the brink of surrendering to its injuries. However, his lack of experience was his downfall. Instead of throwing in heavy rocks, he chose to stab the monster with a pitchfork at the bottom of the pit. In the second half of the battle, he was overconfident and underestimated the monster's intelligence. His insufficient combat experience made him fall into the monster's trap, which almost got him killed. That performance would have been a disaster. Thankfully, his earlier successes had pushed the monster to its limit, and it didn't kill him quickly enough. This gave him a chance to complete his meditation and summon his special trait. Before this battle, Lumion had not expected the special trait to have such a powerful effect. It caused the monster to descend into uncontrollable fear, one so unbreakable despite suffering attacks. He had worried that the near-death state brought about by summoning the special trait would make him vulnerable to attack. But it turned out to be special and very strong. As Lumion sighed, he had a revelation. The monsters in the ruins avoided his house and made it its safe zone because there was something even more terrifying inside. It could be the owner of the mysterious voice he heard when he summoned the special trait. Lumion gasped at the thought. His subconscious urged him to search every corner of the house for the terrifying thing. But he quickly dismissed the idea, provoking the being that even the shotgun-wielding monster was helpless against was not an option. For now all was calm and peaceful, and it was best to keep it that way. He had to maintain the current state of the safe house and not uncover the shroud. Each passing day was a day, and as for the dangers that may lie ahead, he would face them when the time came. Not until then. Not until I become a beyonder and gain significant power. Lumion cast his gaze at the cloth bag in his left hand. Even as Lumion examined his injuries in the mirror, shirtless, he refused to let go of the source of superpowers. He had worked too hard to obtain it. How should I use this thing? He asked himself, opening the cloth bag and staring at the dark red blob within. The blob lay still at the bottom of the bag, its form unstable, yet clearly not alive. Lumion, who knew nothing of mysticism, wondered if he should eat it, perform a ritual to merge with it, or offer it to some secret entity. He only knew of the latter two options from reading Hidden Veil. In the past, he would have only thought of one thing: eat. Lumion didn't rush to make a decision. He intended to seek counsel from the enigmatic lady at Old Tavern first. He was convinced that the woman would provide him with clues on how to harness the power of the dark red sphere and gain superhuman abilities. Lumion sensed that the other party had a reason for doing so, despite not knowing what it was. If things didn't pan out, he could still count on his sister for help. After dressing leisurely, Lumion stowed the lump of crimson in his coat pocket, along with all the cash he'd acquired. Finally, he collapsed onto the bed, too drained to move. Despite the agony in his neck, back, and body, overwhelming fatigue seized him, and he drifted off to sleep in a flash. As Lumion opened his eyes, he was blinded by the sunlight that had already penetrated the curtains, illuminating the entire room. Slowly sitting up, he felt sore all over, as if he had been pummeled in a dream. I was indeed beaten up badly. The injuries in the dream really get reflected into reality, but there's an obvious level of weakening. Trying to move around, he felt his muscles aching a little, but was ultimately relieved that he wasn't too affected. However, when he reached into his pockets, nothing at all. Lumion failed to exit with the crimson blob. His expression became solemn, his brows knitted tightly. Lumion didn't know what to do. The crimson blob, an item that promised superpowers, hadn't followed him into reality. This was different from what the mysterious woman at Old Tavern had said. Lumion gathered himself, quickly changed his clothes, and left his room. As he walked down the hall, he noticed that the door to the washroom was wide open. Aurora was facing the mirror, brushing her teeth with a serious look on her face. "Morning," Lumion greeted. "It's not early anymore. You got up late." Aurora muttered incoherently. Splat! Her blonde hair, tied back into a ponytail, flicked about as she spit out the liquid in her mouth. She turned to look at Lumion. "What did you do wrong last night?" "That owl is outside. How would I dare go out?" Lumion responded calmly. "That's true." Aurora dropped the topic and said, "Remember to take 5 vol d'or to the administrator to send a telegram later." Lumion nodded. This was the key to their escape from Cordu, and it was something he would never forget. After breakfast, Lumion headed straight to the village square, where the administrator's office was located in a 2-story building. Upon reaching the office, Lumion discovered that Administrator Beast had yet to arrive, but the rest of the staff had already commenced their day's work. Lumian paid the required fee and promptly sent a telegram. After concluding his business, Lumian turned on his heel and began walking towards the old tavern. It was highly unlikely that the enigmatic woman was already up and about, but Lumian was more than happy to bide his time. His pursuit of superpowers had been a prolonged one, so a few more ticks on the clock didn't faze him. Lumian sauntered into Old Tavern, his sharp eyes scanning the dimly lit room. To his surprise, the mysterious woman was already seated in her usual corner, enjoying a lavish breakfast spread. She had changed her attire yet again, donning a long brown, pleated dress and a dark velvet hat that screamed high society. So early, Lumian approached her table, calming his racing heart. The woman looked up, meeting his gaze. Is there a possibility that I didn't sleep all night? Perhaps. Lumian knew this routine all too well. His sister Aurora often pulled all-nighters when deadlines were looming. But what was the reason for the enigmatic woman raising this up? As he glanced at her table, he found a delectable spread, with a cream soufflé sprinkled with nuts, a muffin that looked scrumptious, a croissant, a cup of black coffee, and a cat tongue biscuit. What an appetite! Lumian thought, impressed. But how can Cordu provide such luxurious cuisine? Only Aurora, or the chefs in the administrator's family, could whip up something like this. It's all dessert, Lumian said, taking a seat opposite her. The woman nodded, her expression serious for once. Intis's desserts are indeed not bad, and there's quite a lot of variety. Even if I have some for breakfast every day, it'll take me a month without repetition to finish them all, she said, biting into the cat tongue biscuit and closing her eyes in bliss. That's one of the purposes of traveling. Lumian seized the moment to probe the woman's background. You're not from Intis, he asked. The woman smiled enigmatically. I'm from Lone. But given the current situation, this isn't important. What else did Lone have to offer besides steam machinery, factories, and a large army? Lumian, being an Intisian, couldn't help but recall the mocking words that everyone used to taunt the Lone Kingdom. Reclining chairs, mint sauce, fried fish and potatoes, and pure snakefruit beer. But he quickly brushed off the thought and turned his attention to the task at hand. I got rid of the monster with the shotgun. The woman took a sip of coffee and nodded approvingly. Not bad. Lumian sensed a strange emotion emanating from her eyes. He couldn't shake off the strange feeling that he had sensed in their previous interactions. There was something about her that he couldn't quite put his finger on. A mix of facetiousness and hidden emotions that intrigued him. Undeterred, he pressed on with the matter at hand. I obtained an abnormal dark red object from that monster. Holding it makes me irritable and filled with hostility. I think it involves superpowers, but it didn't follow me to reality, he explained. The woman smiled enigmatically. After going in and out so many times, don't you realize that other than your own physical condition, you can't bring anything else over? Lumian was taken aback. Didn't you say that supernatural things are excluded? He trailed off, realizing that he was out of his depth. Lumian couldn't shake off the physical discomfort that lingered from his dream, along with the vivid memories that refused to fade away. After careful consideration, he posed a question. You mean that after obtaining superpowers through the Crimson Blob and turning oneself into a Beyonder, the corresponding state, that is different from that of a normal person, can be brought to reality? Not a lost cause, she replied nonchalantly, savoring the cream soufflé. But won't the corresponding strength weaken because of this? Lumian pressed, his brow furrowing. The injuries I suffered in the dream are much lighter in reality. The conditions brought about by Beyonder characteristics won't change, the woman explained, meeting Lumian's gaze. This is why I said that extraordinary items are excluded. Beyonder characteristics. Lumian mulled over the term, trying to piece together what his sister had told him about Beyonders. Obtaining such characteristics would allow one to become a Beyonder, he surmised. And based on the woman's explanation, he had a hunch about the unique nature of his dream. That ruin, it's real. Or maybe it was once real, but now it's sunk deep into some big shot's dream and been left to fester. And my dream, it's like a secret passageway. A passageway that's only accessible through the symbols on my chest and leads straight to that ruin. Based on my theory, My home in the dream is like a mark left behind by our interaction. It's a reflection of the place where I feel safest, deep in my subconscious. That's why it looks nothing like the wilderness or the ruins that surround it. It's like we're in two different worlds, me and the monsters. But those monsters, they can't come in. They're stuck in the real ruins, while my home is a mix of dream and reality. Only those with the special symbols can pass through the corresponding barrier. The symbols only work for me, and they record the state of my body before I'm brought back to reality. When I wake up, the things that don't involve the supernatural will fade away, but the implications will remain. Even death will work the same way. So there shouldn't be anything scary waiting for me at home in the dream. But the origin of those symbols, and the source of that terrifying voice, they symbolize something dark and horrific. Lumion sat in silence, watching the lady across from him leisurely devour her breakfast. She didn't seem to mind. Lumion finally asked, regaining his composure, "May I ask how I should use that dark red blob? Is it the Beyonder characteristic you mentioned?" At the critical moment, he could not help but address her respectfully. The lady set down her coffee and looked at him. "I can give you a potion formula. Just follow it." The generous gift made Lumion uneasy. "Why are you helping me?" The lady laughed. "Would you believe me if I said it was arranged by fate?" "No." Lumion subconsciously replied inwardly. The abnormality in the village, the pressure of the impending storm, and the desire for superpowers all swirled around Lumion, threatening to overwhelm him. He pushed his unease down and spoke in a low voice. "I do." Opportunities like this didn't come around often, and Lumion knew he had to act decisively. He couldn't afford to hesitate or have second thoughts. The lady's smile grew wider, the unclear emotions he had detected in her eyes earlier intensifying. She pulled out a stack of post-it notes and a silver fountain pen from her black lady's purse and began writing. Finally, she stopped and tore off the top note and handed it to him. Lumion snatched it from her hand and read it quickly. Hunter Potion Formula. Main ingredient: 1 Hunter Beyonder characteristic. Supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of red wine, 1 red chestnut flower. Can be a specimen or substituted with 10 drops of the corresponding essential oil. 5 grams of poplar tree leaf powder, 10 grams of basil. Usage: drink it directly. Satisfied with his memorization, Lumion carefully folded the note and slipped it into his brown jacket. Done with that, he asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "What does hunter mean?" "Hunter in the supernatural sense. The corresponding sequence," the lady replied, taking a casual sip of her coffee. "You do not know much about mysticism, so let me explain. There are 22 common pathways in the world. To access them, you must obtain ingredients with the corresponding Beyonder characteristics and concoct potions. Each pathway has 10 sequences, numbered from 9 to 0. The lower the number, the higher the level, and the stronger the ability. The Beyonder characteristic you obtain belongs to the Red Priest pathway. It can only be used to concoct the corresponding sequence 9 Hunter potion." Lumion listened attentively and blurted out, "Then what sequence does my sister Aurora belong to?" "She's a sequence 7 warlock of the Mystery Prior pathway," the lady replied coolly. She did not mention how she knew. "Aurora is already at sequence 7? "That's true. She has already obtained superpowers for several years. I'll only be at sequence 9 after consuming the potion. I'm still quite a distance from her. I only hope that I won't be a burden when we escape Cordu in the future." Lumion couldn't help but ask, "Can I drink higher sequence Beyonder potions directly? Or should I drink sequence 9 today and sequence 8 tomorrow?" "Theoretically, yes," the lady added after Lumion revealed a look of joy. "However, most who attempt it end up dead or as a monster. Fewer than 1 in 10 million people succeed. Turn into monsters." Lumion was alarmed. The lady chuckled and said, "Didn't your sister warn you about the dangers of the path to transcendence? After drinking the potion, if you can't control the power, you'll either die from a physical breakdown or transform into a monster. Why do you think the one you encountered was in human form?" No wonder. Lumion finally understood what danger his sister was talking about. But he was willing to face it. "Is there no way to reduce this danger?" he asked. The lady considered him for a moment before answering, "There is. You need a firm will, good physical condition, and some luck. As for the rest, you don't need to know. You're still on the first potion. Good physical condition. Lumian, who had planned on returning to catch up on sleep and drink the potion later, frowned. He was still seriously injured in the dream. The lady opposite him nodded slightly and said, "Take your time. Wait until nightfall, and your body has mostly recovered before diving back into your dreams." Lumian's mind raced with questions. So as long as my body in reality is almost healed, the injuries in my dream will completely recover. One had to know that his body in reality was only a little sore. It was completely different from the injuries in the dream. Yes, the lady confirmed Lumian's guess. She continued, "There's much to learn about the potion and the paths of the divine. I'll tell you once you become a hunter." The paths of the divine? Lumian asked in puzzlement. "Why not tell me now?" The lady laughed. "If you die or become a monster, it would be a waste of my time to say so much now." Lumian was speechless. Lumian stood up and excused himself. But before he left, he asked one more thing. "Do you know about the anomaly in the village?" The lady nibbled on a croissant before answering Lumian's question. "I do." She really knows. Lumian's heart leapt with hope. He deliberated over his words before asking, using honorifics to show his respect. "May I offer to pay a certain price to commission your help in solving Corda's problem?" From his point of view, this mysterious lady woman was much stronger than Leah and her companions. If she agreed to help, the problem with Cordu would be solved, and he and his sister wouldn't have to risk their lives to escape. But he was worried that he couldn't afford the price. Lumian wasn't optimistic that the woman would agree to help, but he felt it was necessary to try. Even if he was rejected, he wouldn't be too embarrassed. He was not a stickler for such things. The woman turned to him and spoke calmly. "I can indeed solve the problem here, but the corresponding price is that everything will be destroyed, including you. If you want a better outcome, you can only rely on yourselves." Lumian's eyes widened in disbelief. Could the problem with Corda be that serious? He searched the woman's face for any sign of jest, but found none. He wasn't surprised or disappointed that she refused to help. What shocked him was the severity of the problem. It could even lead to the destruction of the entire village. He was puzzled and alarmed by the situation. Since she can resolve it, why is it that the entire village will die, while us ordinary people and beyonders who aren't strong enough capable of producing a better outcome? If he didn't hear back from Novel Weekly by the day after tomorrow, he would urge his sister to leave Cordu immediately. He couldn't delay any longer, even if it meant taking a huge risk. He had to act fast. "What's the problem?" Lumian pressed, his dignity never a priority. The lady smiled. "Me telling you, and you finding out through your investigations, will give rise to completely different results." Lumian gritted his teeth instinctively. He didn't stand her behavior of always holding back something. For some reason, he sensed that peculiar feeling in the woman's eyes. Something he couldn't quite put his finger on. "Okay." Lumian paused for a moment, weighing his words carefully. "Do you have any information about Madame Pualis? Is she a warlock? A beyonder?" The woman lifted her coffee cup to her lips and took a small sip before answering. "Yes, she is." "Indeed." Lumian asked further, "What pathway, which sequence?" The lady's expression turned serious in an instant. "It's not a normal pathway." "What do you mean it's not a normal pathway?" he pressed. The lady smiled. "You'll find out later. I want to know now." Lumian struggled to keep his expression in check. Already standing and about to leave, Lumian suddenly remembered something crucial. "Madam, how am I supposed to bring those supplementary ingredients into the dream?" In the dream ruins, he could only find basic ingredients like red wine and basil in the dream ruins, but for the red chestnut flower and poplar leaf, he would have to collect them in reality. The task wasn't impossible, and Lumian had already thought of a way to borrow them, but he knew it would all be for naught if he couldn't transfer them to his dream. The lady smiled and said, "I'll offer you a little assistance again, free of charge. Find those materials in reality, put them on the table in your bedroom before you sleep. I'll help you send them into your dream." "She can send those things into my dream?" Lumian was first shocked before feeling a wave of relief wash over him. At least his problem was solved. He never thought he'd encounter someone else with the ability to enter the special dream world like he could. Lumion couldn't shake the feeling that his ability to enter dream ruins had something to do with the cryptic symbols etched onto his chest. As he gazed at the woman before him, he couldn't help but wonder if she was connected to those same markings, or that bizarre and terrifying voice that had been echoing in his mind. Lumion had just left the old tavern, and had plans to collect the red chestnut flower and poplar leaves. But as he turned the corner, he saw Ryan, Leah, and Valentine exiting the back door of the tavern. They were still dressed in the same clothes and outfits. Lumion's heart skipped a beat as he greeted them with a smile. "Good morning, my cabbages." Leah turned her head and laughed amidst the tinkling sounds. "You're early too." Lumion tried to act sneaky, and looked around before speaking in a hushed tone. "I noticed something unusual yesterday." Ryan's expression turned serious as he exchanged glances with Valentine and Leah. "What is it?" Lumion's voice quivered slightly as he spoke. "I suspect that Naroka's death is abnormal. You attended her funeral yesterday." Ryan gave Lumion an encouraging look to continue, and Lumion took a deep breath before proceeding with his suspicions. "I told you about the funeral customs in the Deriz area, didn't I?" After everyone went to the cemetery, Pons Benet entered Naroka's house without any objection from the owner. Isn't this destroying the influence of their family's horoscope and taking away the corresponding good luck? There must be something wrong. Pons Benet, the brother of the padre? Ryan thought for a few seconds and asked. Lumion nodded heavily. As Lumion thought about the padre's strange group and his impending departure from Cordu, he realized he had nothing to fear from speaking his mind. With a deep breath he declared, "The padre is not a good man." "Why do you say that?" Leah asked with a grin, clearly unsurprised by Lumion's criticism of the padre. Not one for formalities. Lumion launched into a detailed account of a villager who had snitched in Deriz and subsequently vanished. His focus was on the accusations against the padre, and he held nothing back. Finally he said, "I really question how he's a clergyman of the church. One time, I said something that was deemed too real, and I had to hide temporarily in the cathedral. I was about to doze off behind the altar when the padre walked in with Madame Pualis. And let me tell you, they were doing the dirty deed right under the deity's gaze. In the conversation that followed the deed, the padre even lamented to Madame Pualis, saying, 'Why can't a man marry his sister?' Madame Pualis was appalled by his words and begged the padre to repent. However, the padre said, 'Many wealthy families lose their fortunes when their daughters marry and their sons start families. But if a son could marry his sister, these problems would disappear. Unfortunately, the law and morals don't allow it.'" The frigid Valentine's face contorted with anger at the news. "Is he a servant of God or a servant of the demon?" Ryan nodded as if in thought. No wonder Pons Benet hasn't been able to start a family despite being married after all these years. Leah surveyed Lumion as she chuckled. "You knew about Madame Pualis and the padre's affair. You wanted to use us that day." Lumion's smile was uneasy, but his tone was resolute. "As a believer of the eternal blazing sun, I cannot tolerate such a person in the cathedral." The cold Valentine's expression softened, and he nodded approvingly. "If only Cordu had more people like you. A few more like me?" Lumion shuddered at the thought of Cordu overrun with more people like him. He continued, "That time, I overheard the padre warning Madame Pualis that he was planning something and might be targeted by the Inquisition. He told her to be careful and keep quiet." Ryan's expression turned solemn. "Did he say anything more about it?" "No." Lumion didn't fabricate the matter. He couldn't risk saying more than that. If he did, trouble could erupt tonight. He wasn't even a beyonder yet. After bidding farewell to the trio of foreigners, Lumion spent hours gathering red chestnut flowers and poplar leaves. As the sun neared its apex, Lumion arrived at the village square and made his way to the two-story building where official business was conducted. Most of the villagers had already gathered, eagerly awaiting the selection of the spring elf, an important part of the upcoming Lenten celebration tomorrow. Squeezing through the crowd, Lumion spotted Raimund, Ava, and the others. "Is Ava on the list?" he asked. Ava remained silent, her agitation palpable. Raimund shook his head. "We don't know. She must be on it," interjected Guillaume Barry. a frequent companion of Lumion and the others. Among the unmarried women in the village, other than your sister, she's the most beautiful. Your sister doesn't meet the age requirements. He was the Guillaume Jr. that Lumion and the others were talking about. He hung out with them frequently. Guillaume had curly brown hair and prominent freckles on his face. His blue eyes seemed to narrow because they weren't large enough. Ava's cousin Azema also stood nearby, looking much like Ava but smaller and less striking. She remained silent, but Lumion sensed her desire to be chosen as the spring elf as well. In the Deriz area, being chosen as the spring elf was a coveted honor that not only recognized a person's beauty and character, but also came with hidden benefits. Upon hearing Guillaume Jr.'s words, Lumion grinned. If Ava's not on the list, I'll shout, "I vote Ava," when the administrator finishes reading it. Ava blushed. You don't have to do that. It was a normal process for villagers to shout out additional candidates after the administrator finished reading the list of nominees for the spring elf. However, not many had the nerve to do so. Lumion, however, was not one to shy away from such things. He had no misgivings about this. Ava will be the one being embarrassed, not me. Shortly after, Administrator Beast appeared at a second-story window, looking far more put together than the padre. His neatly combed brown hair, light blue eyes with black lines, straight nose bridge, thin lips and well-groomed mustache conveyed his status, accentuated by his double-breasted flannel coat. He gazed down at the assembled villagers for a moment before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time. Those who are late will no longer have the right to vote. Next, I'll read the list of candidates for the spring elf. Ava Lizier. As Beast read out the list, Ava breathed a sigh of relief. Unsurprisingly, she received over 80% of the votes. After the voting, Lumion made an excuse about needing to go home, and left without celebrating with his companions. Upon arriving home, he immediately asked his sister, "Did we receive a reply?" If they had, the telegrapher would have delivered it and collected a fee. Not yet, Aurora replied, shaking her head. She then said, "The undercurrents have been turbulent lately. You can't let your guard down during combat practice. Speaking of which, we'll spar in the afternoon." Lumion winced, feeling sore all over. But then an idea struck him. He put on a pained expression and said, "I don't know if it's because I've been training too hard, but my whole body hurts today. Aurora, sister, can you give me a massage? You're the most skilled at it." Aurora nodded. "Sure, I can do that." Under the skilled hands of his sister, Lumion's body finally began to recover that night. Before drifting off to sleep, Lumion placed 3 red chestnut flowers and some powdered poplar leaves in a bottle on the table in front of the window. He gazed at the bottle for a long moment, his heart beating with anticipation and nervousness, before finally crawling under the covers. As Lumion awoke in the gray fog, his first instinct was not to check his physical condition. Instead, he sat up abruptly and looked at the table by the window. There, bathed in the soft light that filtered through the thick fog, were the 3 red chestnut flowers and the glass bottle of poplar leaf powder. She really sent the supplementary ingredients in. Relief flooded Lumion. He got out of bed and stretched, delighted to discover that the pain in his neck and back had vanished, along with the general discomfort he had been feeling. Just as I hoped. I'm fine in the dream when I'm better in reality, even though the injuries on both sides aren't equal at all. He quickly walked over to the wardrobe with the full-length mirror, took off his shirt, and examined himself. The 5 bloody finger marks, the bruises, and the blood clots were all gone. This made Lumion wonder if killing the Beyonder monster had been nothing more than a dream. Thankfully, the crimson object in the cloth bag, the slightly larger sum of money, and the shotgun next to his bed confirmed the reality of his experience. Lumion's heart eased. With the cloth bag containing the crimson item and a large amount of money, he left the bedroom and went straight to the first floor. Grabbing a bottle of red wine and a beer mug, he headed back up with some basil. He made sure to bring along a measuring cylinder and miniature scale that his sister Aurora had purchased for his studies. Looking at the desk filled with all the necessary items, Lumion felt both excited and nervous. With everything in place, all that remained was to concoct the potion. Potions were not beverages. They were more dangerous than alcohol, capable of killing or transforming the drinker into a monster with the slightest mistake. Lumion took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, his hands steady as he used the measuring cylinder to pour 80 milliliters of red wine into the beer mug. Next, he added 10 grams of basil, 5 grams of poplar leaf powder, and a single red chestnut flower. The process proceeded without incident. The red liquid in the mug had a few more dregs and a floating flower, but otherwise looked unremarkable. With the cloth bag of crimson substance at his side, Lumion watched intently as the object slid into the beer mug. Without a sound, the dark red blob seemed to dissolve rapidly, drawing in the surrounding liquid in the process. Bubbles erupted, and the entire mug turned a deep shade of red. The red chestnut flower had dissolved completely. "This is the hunter potion?" Lumion gulped and picked up his beer mug. The supernatural power he had sought for so long was finally within his grasp. Without hesitation, he took a deep breath and steeled himself for what was to come. Raising the mug to his lips, he drank the potion in one swift gulp. The pungent odor of blood filled his nostrils, and he started hearing things. As he set the mug down, a searing pain ripped through his body, so intense that Lumion wondered if he had swallowed a ball of fire. The flames seemed to burn through his esophagus, stomach, heart, lungs, intestines, and blood vessels all at once. At the same time, a strong scent of blood wafted up from his throat. Lumion fought to remain conscious, remembering the lady's warning that fainting would mean defeat. He knew the stakes were high, and the outcome was obvious if he failed. His head swam as he lowered it, gazing at the bright red veins protruding from the back of his hand. The pain and burning came in waves, but they quickly began to recede. But just as he thought it was over, a mysterious voice echoed in his mind, as if coming from both infinitely far away and right beside him. The sound was like steel thorns piercing his brain, stirring it forcefully. Suddenly, the near-death experience he had faced before returned, and the pain and burning flared up once more. Lumion gritted his teeth and clenched his fists, feeling as though something was trying to claw its way out of his flesh. The gray fog around him seemed to thicken. The terrifying sound that had filled his ears slowly faded away, and the writhing of his flesh and blood vanished like an illusion. The excruciating pain, the burning sensation, and the metallic scent of blood dissipated, leaving Lumion gasping for cold air as he regained control of his body. He bent over, hands on his knees, panting heavily as he realized the true dangers of pursuing superpowers, as his sister had warned him. A mere Sequence 9 potion had nearly claimed his life. Of course, it had first seemed manageable, dangerous but manageable. But the mysterious voice that had been brought on by the symbol on his chest had almost caused him to collapse at the critical moment. Each breath he took seemed to restore some of his strength, and before long, he felt fully recovered. Bang! Lumion clenched his fist and swung it hard, striking out at the air with a force that caused a sonic boom. He had never imagined possessing such power before, and the realization filled him with excitement. In his small bedroom, he practiced a combat technique his sister had taught him, each punch producing a crisp sound. Bang! 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 Despite the commotion, Lumion moved with precision and control, not touching anything as he completed the set. To his surprise, he felt neither tired nor fatigued, but rather energetic and alive. He assessed his condition, on par with Aurora. In terms of strength, speed, reaction, or body control, they've all been greatly enhanced. It's a little inhuman. I possess the strength of a bear and the agility of a cat. It's slightly equivalent to the combination of the two. Without the potion, I might never be able to reach this level of power in my life. But before he could finish his inspection, Lumion caught the scent of blood, his heart tightening with fear. Instinctively, he sniffed the air and realized that he could determine the source of the blood. It came from his body. Lumion looked down and saw that the back of his hand was covered in blood-red spots. He came to the full-body mirror again, and realized that his face was similarly stained. He wiped some of the blood away, but found no sign of any wounds. After a moment's thought, Lumion came to a realization. Did the potion cause the capillaries Aurora talked about to burst? And then they quickly healed after I absorbed the potion? The only explanation for his current condition was supernatural influence. Realizing he was not injured, Lumian pushed the matter aside and focused on his sense of smell, which seemed to have undergone a significant change. As he concentrated, the scents around him were decomposed and drilled into his nose in various forms. The smell of blood, the residual smell of alcohol, the fragrance of flowers, the smell of dust. Lumian began identifying the scents around him one by one, even the slightest ones not escaping his heightened senses. Simultaneously, he saw invisible footprints and the distribution of dust in the bedroom, heard the beating of his own heart, and the breeze outside the house. The second change is that my sensory abilities have increased exponentially, surpassing the standards of ordinary humans. No wonder the monster I had encountered was so skilled at tracking. Lumian was delighted. More importantly, this improvement did not interfere with his daily life, and only appeared when he focused. It only took the form of a weaker version. Through experimentation and self-examination, Lumian discovered two other changes brought on by the hunter potion. The third change allows me to accurately locate certain points in his environment, such as weak spots in a wall, enabling me to set traps more efficiently and kill my enemies, be they humans, beasts, or monsters, more effectively. The fourth change is that I have more knowledge about wild plants and animal organs, allowing me to survive better in the wilderness and quickly find hemostatic medicine when injured. I can even make poison to smear on weapons if needed. As he confirmed these newfound abilities, Lumian couldn't help but feel a sense of absurdity. I actually managed to kill that shotgun monster? The current me is much stronger than the previous me, and it was not much weaker than the current me. Lumian contemplated for a while, and concluded two crucial points. Ability is important, but brains are equally important. Exploiting a good environment can effectively increase my strength. After some thought, Lumian added inwardly, also, I can't be careless and lose my patience at any time. He walked to the window and gazed at the dream ruins again. An indescribable sense of oppression, fear, and danger surged into his heart. This was something he had never felt before. The fifth change is some kind of intuition strengthening. Lumian nodded gently. He went to the washroom and washed his body with clean water. He changed into a fresh set of clothes and then lay back on the bed, with the money close. He wanted to get back to reality as soon as possible, eager to know if the hunter abilities would stay with him, or if they would be weakened. In the dead of night, Corda was eerily silent. The clouds shrouded the crimson moon and stars, leaving the darkness to reign supreme. Lumian surveyed the night scenery and felt an overwhelming sense of happiness. He was now a beyonder in the real world, and his powers hadn't weakened at all compared to the dream realm. As an intuition struck him, Lumian unbuttoned his shirt and gazed down at his chest. The black symbol resembling a thorn chain was slowly fading away. It also appears in reality, Lumian muttered, feeling a twinge of unease. He noticed that the bluish-black symbol that had loomed over the thorny chain existed only in his dreams. Suddenly, Lumian's heart skipped a beat as he gazed up at the nearby elm tree. The legendary owl of the warlock was perched on a branch, observing him quietly. The brownish-yellow eyes of the owl glowed in the dark, fixating on Lumian as it perched on the branch. Lumian was no longer as intimidated as he was during their previous encounters. He yelled, "Whatcha looking at? Say something if you dare." Lumian didn't have to provoke the owl, but he hoped it would reveal the owl's true motive. He couldn't bear the thought of the creature lurking around and staring at him in the dead of night. To his surprise, the owl remained silent and didn't make a sound. After a few tense seconds, the owl spread its wings and flew off into the darkness. Crazy! Lumian let out a frustrated curse, but he didn't dare let his guard down. Lumian remained focused on scrutinizing the dark shadows outside, trying to detect any signs of danger. He recalled that the last time the owl had appeared, he had seen Naroka's figure and learned of her death the following day. I wonder if something similar will happen this time. But after careful observation, he didn't notice anything abnormal and breathed a sigh of relief. He drew the curtains and lay back on the bed. In the deep darkness, Lumian opened his eyes, contemplating his next move. I wonder what this owl is trying to do. It's acting so strange and mysterious. It shouldn't be up to anything good. Whatever. With the situation in the village, I have to leave with Aurora as soon as possible. I don't believe that it can follow us to Trier. If I don't receive a reply tomorrow, we'll leave Cordu the morning after tomorrow. If there's a reply, we can leave Cordu openly from the village entrance. If not, we'll have to improvise. It's Lent tomorrow, and everyone will still be celebrating the day after tomorrow, so we won't attract too much attention. Aurora can borrow Madame Puali's pony and spend some time in the nearby alpine pastures. We don't need to go down the mountain, so it shouldn't attract the investigators' attention. When the time comes, we can use a dangerous trail to leave the mountain. The path is treacherous, with several broken parts in the middle. Even the shepherds don't think it's passable. However, with my newfound abilities and Aurora's witchcraft, allowing her to fly a distance, she'll have it easier than me. There's a good chance we can hoodwink the investigators. Becoming a hunter had allowed him to do what was previously impossible. It gave Lumion a newfound sense of confidence, allowing him to quickly formulate a plan. His heart became more certain, and he slept soundly. The next morning, Lumion rose early and got to work in the kitchen. His thoughts turned to how he had become a beyonder, and how he was about to leave the abnormal village of Cordu with his sister. Lumion's mood brightened, and he even found himself eager to hum a tune. When Aurora came downstairs, there were already 2 bowls of minced meat noodles on the table. "How did you know I was about to get up?" she asked, pleased. "I started cooking noodles when I heard movement in the washroom." Lumion grinned, inwardly noting, "You are always in a groggy state after waking up. How don't you realize this?" Aurora nodded. As she sat at the dining table, she casually asked, "That owl flew over again in the middle of the night?" "That's right." Lumion knew that his sister had discovered him looking out the window, so the owl's appearance had been a fortunate distraction. Otherwise, he wasn't sure how to explain himself. He couldn't risk telling Aurora about his newfound beyonder abilities just yet, as he would be given a dressing down by her. However, Lumion planned to divulge the truth to his sister sooner than later. He wanted to avoid Aurora from having considerations that might hinder their escape. He planned to tell his sister about this the day after tomorrow, when they escaped from Cordu, to prevent her from diverting her attention to take care of him. By then, she wouldn't have the time to give him a dressing down. Aurora furrowed her brow in confusion. What a strange owl. She was still trying to decipher the bird's true intentions. All it did was come over to take a look. Lumion slurped up the last of his noodles, then turned to his sister. "If there's a reply, we'll leave Cordu this evening and take the usual path down the mountain. If not, borrow a pony from Madame Puali's tomorrow morning, and we'll head to the nearest alpine ranch. I know of a trail that leads down the mountain, and the investigators won't be aware of it." Aurora fiddled with her hair, deep in thought. After a while, she grinned and said, "Sure, the probability of this plan succeeding is quite high." She clicked her tongue and added, "My stupid brother has grown up." Lumion couldn't help but feel smug, basking in his sister's praise. After breakfast, Lumion made an excuse to go see if Ava was finished with her Spring Elf Blessings tour. He left the subterranean building and headed straight to Old Tavern. As a newly minted beyonder, Lumion was eager to gain more knowledge, and the lady had promised to share some with him. Not far from the tavern, Lumion spotted an old acquaintance walking towards him. It was Pons Benet, the younger brother of the local padre. "He's alone." Lumion couldn't help but smile at the thought of how he had been chased by Pons and his thugs in the past. Having just obtained superpowers, he was already eager to test out his new superpowers. "Hey, my illegitimate son," Lumion greeted him. "How dare you go out alone without Daddy's permission?" Lumion hoped to provoke Pons and goad him into a fight instead of letting him run. Pons Benet looked in the direction of the voice and saw him. The villain's expression changed slightly. He turned to run away. Thud, thud, thud. Lumion watched in disbelief as Pons sprinted away, disappearing at the intersection not far away. He sure ran fast. Quite an alert one. Lumion sighed silently. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that he could take down Pons Benet in a one-on-one scrap, even before he ascended to beyonder status. But it seemed likely that Pons Benet had the same notion. The two of them had never properly thrown down, but they both had confidence in their own abilities. So, It caught him off guard when Pons Binet bolted the second he caught sight of him today, like he'd come face to face with a bloodthirsty beast. It's impossible for him to know that I secretly became a Beyonder last night. Is he so dense that he's developed animal instincts and can sniff out danger? Lumion slandered Pons Binet in his heart. He refrained from pursuing Pons Binet because he regretted the moment he'd greeted him. The village was riddled with aberrations, and the situation was perilous. Lumion knew better than to stir the pot before he left. If he had pummeled Pons Binet, the Padre and his goons might spring into action prematurely, thus jeopardizing his and Aurora's escape. It would be too late for regrets when that happened. Furthermore, the Padre's group was an enigma, and there could be something off about Pons Binet. Lumion suspected that if he engaged in fisticuffs with him, his Beyonder identity would be exposed, and that would spell trouble in the future. Being a Beyonder has made me too haughty and overconfident. I need to rein myself in, Lumion mused, reflecting on his behavior, as he entered Old Tavern. He had intended to head straight to the second floor, but his eyes landed on the lady seated in the corner. Today, the lady was garbed in a pearl gray dress and a light-colored lady's bonnet. Lumion noticed that there wasn't any food in front of her. "Have you had breakfast?" he asked, taking a seat opposite her. The lady replied nonchalantly, "Not yet. I'm meeting someone here, and I'm still waiting for her." "Her? Not me?" Lumion scanned the area, but saw no one else except the tavern owner. He looked at the lady again and sincerely said, "I've become a hunter. It's time for you to keep your promise and give me more common knowledge." The lady wasn't surprised at all. She remarked with a smile, "It seems you're in pretty good shape." She spoke in a voice that sounded almost otherworldly. "What you need to master now are 2 laws and 1 method. Why does it feel like I'm studying physics?" Lumion didn't dare speak his thoughts aloud. The lady continued to speak. "For most Beyonders, this knowledge is incredibly valuable. They'd trade everything they have just to acquire it. But for you, fate has brought you here, and so I'll give it to you for free. Free things often come at the most hefty price. How will I pay the price?" Lumion felt a weight settle on his shoulders. Ever since he became a hunter, his intuition and observation skills had improved significantly. He could sense a strange, indescribable emotion in the lady's eyes, much stronger than before, but he still couldn't put a finger on what it was. The lady straightened up. "All superpowers come from the oldest one, the Creator. As a believer of the eternal blazing sun, you should know that his eyes became the sun." Yes, Lumion had heard the Padre's sermons about it before. "That's a symbolic description," the lady clarified. "In essence, the oldest one created this world and many deities. Eventually, he disintegrated himself and split into Beyonder characteristics of different pathways. So that's why they're called the paths of the divine." Lumion connected the dots. The lady nodded slightly. "Yes, every pathway sequence 0 is equivalent to a true god. For instance, the barred pathway sequence 0 is known as the sun, which is also the eternal blazing sun you believe in." Lumion was surprised and a little apprehensive. So every Beyonder can become a god in the end? If he were a devout believer of the eternal blazing sun, he would have accused the lady of blasphemy. But he wasn't that kind of person. He was just a casual believer who didn't give it much thought. He even asked, "What's the hunter pathway sequence 0? And what about the mystery prior pathway?" "Didn't I already tell you? It's the Red Priest, and the position is currently vacant," the lady replied with a chuckle. "As for the mystery prior pathway, the sequence 0 is known as the Hermit, and it's currently occupied by an evil god called the Hidden Sage. He likes to impart knowledge to Beyonders of the same pathway, earning him the nickname Knowledge Pursuer. Your sister's troubles stem from him. Is that so?" Lumion felt a twinge of dislike towards the Hidden Sage. The woman redirected the conversation. "Since Beyonder characteristics come from the oldest one, they won't disappear or increase. They only transform from one form to another, moving from one object to another. This is known as the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility, or the law of conservation." Lumion put his physics knowledge to work and pondered for a moment. Why not just call it the law of conservation? That's another law. But don't worry about the details for now. The woman nodded in agreement. Essentially, It's the same as the law of indestructibility, but with additional prerequisites and specific elaborations. Is that so? Lumian considered for a moment before speaking. So, according to the law of indestructibility, if I want to obtain Beyonder characteristics, I can target other Beyonders, in addition to hunting the corresponding monsters. Since Beyonder characteristics were indestructible, a Beyonder's death would result in the appearance of the corresponding Beyonder characteristics. The woman's face showed a certain amount of emotion. You're very perceptive. Therefore, this law isn't suitable for most Beyonders to know. It would result in Beyonders killing each other, and they won't be able to trust each other. Lumian didn't mind this. Even without this law, humans still kill each other. In the real world, there's plenty of suspicion, bullying, and murder. The woman replied with interest, but at least there's still a certain warmth and light of the human spirit. Lumian pondered for a while before speaking. Looking at it from another perspective, this law should become a consensus among Beyonders. That way, the weak can be prepared in advance, and not become easy prey for those who know. The lady nodded slightly. That does make some sense. Actually, if battles between Beyonders happen frequently enough, people involved would likely be able to figure it out. She then introduced, the second law is called the law of Beyonder characteristics convergence. Convergence? Lumian struggled to understand. He couldn't quite derive it from their earlier conversation. The woman's expression turned serious. As the creator of this world, even if the oldest one splits into Beyonder characteristics of different pathways, it doesn't mean that he has completely withdrawn from the stage. His mind is scattered among the different Beyonder characteristics, and will never be obliterated unless this world completely perishes. These minds are similar to a brand, but they have the instinct to reassemble and revive the oldest one. In other words, after you become a Beyonder, you're more likely to encounter other Beyonders than before. You're more likely to encounter Beyonders of the same pathway, or neighboring pathways than Beyonders of other pathways. This is the convergence of fate. The higher the sequence, the more obvious this situation becomes. Lumian had many questions, but he decided to start with the most important one. So, combined with the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility, can I conclude that convergence leads to massacres? The lady once again revealed an approving expression. You're very perceptive on such matters. It's not a problem when your sequence is low, but at the demigod stage, especially after becoming an angel, you must find a way to weaken or avoid the effects of convergence. Demigod angel? Lumian was surprised and intrigued upon hearing these terms, even though he knew that every sequence could eventually become a true god. The lady casually explained, demigod is a term for Beyonders from sequence 4 to sequence 1, meaning half god, half human. Among them, sequence 4 and sequence 3 are known as saints, while sequence 2 and sequence 1 are called angels. There are other names beyond that, but it's best if you not know them for now. Saints, angels. Lumian thought of the saints and angels from different regions. They were real. The remains of a saint are the corpses of saints. There are Beyonder characteristics left behind? Lumian asked, feeling a little afraid. So every Beyonder characteristic has the mental imprint of the oldest one. And the higher the sequence, the more is left behind? Wouldn't the person who consumes the potion be affected in other ways? The lady confirmed with a smile. Yes. Why do you think this path is filled with danger and madness? Losing control is one of the main reasons why consuming a potion can be so dangerous. To be specific, it's losing control of superpowers and one's own mind and transforming into a terrifying monster. Is there another reason? Lumian pressed. The lady tersely grunted. Firstly, the intensity of the mental imprint mainly depends on the level of the owners of the corresponding Beyonder characteristics. Their obsession and madness before death also contribute to it. Secondly, consuming the potion in the wrong order or method can cause a huge conflict in the body. Thirdly, some existences can use the consumption of potions to exert influence. For example, every time the mystery prior pathway consumes a potion, they passively receive knowledge installation from the hidden sage. Similar to the voice I heard after drinking the hunter potion? Lumian deliberated for a moment before recounting his encounter truthfully. Which entity's influence is that? The next second, he saw the expression of the lady opposite him become a little odd. She said solemnly, "Some existences can corrupt and take control of you, just by knowing of their existence. Unfortunately, the owner of that voice is one such existence. It's not suitable for you to know their honorific name at the moment." Lumien's mind raced with thoughts. That horrifying? A sequence 0 true God? But most people in Intis and I know about the eternal blazing sun, and the god of steam and machinery. There's nothing wrong with them. Could there be a difference between a true god and an evil god? But she mentioned the hidden sage, who is also a sequence 0. Is it possible she doesn't know who it is, and is using vague terms to mask her ignorance? He gave up on the topic, considering his own strength, and asked about another intriguing term. What is a neighboring pathway? The woman's expression returned to normal as she explained, under normal circumstances. If you choose a pathway, and consume the corresponding potion, you can only go down that path one step at a time. Otherwise, you will definitely lose control, or at the very least half lose control. However, there are always exceptions. Every pathway has one or more neighboring pathways. You can jump over at a specific sequence, such as sequence 4, which divides between humans and demigods. Hunter's neighboring pathway is Assassin. Assassin? Sounds cooler than Hunter. Lumian asked with concern, which pathway's neighbor Mystery Prior? Will one no longer be affected by the hidden sage, after jumping to a neighboring pathway? The Savant pathway. The current sequence 0 is the god of steam and machinery, the woman replied calmly. After jumping over, one will still be affected by the hidden sage, but the degree will decrease significantly. However, the corresponding beyonder characteristics still exist unless one finds a way to expel them. How? Lumian asked, surprised. The easiest way is to have children. In mysticism, there's a high chance of transferring the corresponding beyonder characteristics to a child through heredity, the woman explained. Alternatively, you can use the special abilities of certain pathways, but there's a certain risk, and you have to pay a considerable price. Lumian nodded before raising another question. Can I switch only at a particular sequence? The chances of reaching sequence 4 and becoming a demigod were slim. The lady glanced at him. In theory, it's possible to switch at a lower sequence, but the risk of losing control is much higher. Unless there's no other way, it's best not to attempt it. The woman paused before saying, I've finished explaining the 2 laws. Now I'll explain the method. This is one of the most important pieces of knowledge in the mystical world. Most important. Lumian instinctively straightened his back, feeling abnormally focused. The lady continued to speak. It's called the acting method. It's a way to help you digest the potion. By digesting the potion, the risk of losing control will be greatly reduced when consuming the next sequence potion. It's no wonder I can't drink the sequence 9 potion today, and drink the sequence 8 potion tomorrow. I have to use the acting method to digest the previous potion. Lumian came to a realization. He did not interrupt her, and listened attentively to her explanation. Remember, it's digestion, not control. What's the acting method? It involves acting according to the name of a sequence like an actor. By reconciling the differences between one's body and the remnant mental imprints of the beyonder characteristics, one can obtain the corresponding recognition. This allows them to bypass the barrier that originally existed and fuse the beyonder characteristics with themselves. So, I have to act like a hunter and hunt in the mountains every day? Lumian asked attentively. Lumian appeared as attentive as a student. The lady shook her head. That's just the most superficial form of acting. We not only have to understand the surface meaning of a sequence's name, but we also have to investigate its deeper meaning. For example, the city is also a jungle. Everyone is both prey and hunter. I'm familiar with this. Lumian was already familiar with this concept, which he had learned during his days as a vagrant. How can you be sure that you have digested the potion and can advance to the next sequence? Lumian asked curiously. The lady smiled. You will sense it when the potion is truly digested. All right. Lumian didn't continue the topic and asked in puzzlement, who named the different sequences? Why could he digest the potion just by acting them out? The lady's expression turned serious. The earliest sequence divisions came from the remnants of the oldest ones splintering. It was a stone slab filled with mystical knowledge. As it involves the secret of becoming a deity, it's called the blasphemy slate. In ancient times, during the end of the second epoch and the entire third epoch, a powerful deity close to the oldest one appeared. He was called the ancient sun god. After he perished, a second blasphemy slate was born from his remains. All the current sequence names and potion formulas came from it. That's not the second and third epoch history I learned. Lumion muttered inwardly. The lady continued to speak. When Emperor Roselle was alive, he used the second blasphemy slate as a reference to create a cards of blasphemy set based on tarot cards. There are a total of 22 cards, and each card represents a pathway of the divine. Lumion was astonished. Emperor Roselle is also a beyonder. As an ordinary Intisian, it was difficult for him not to feel a certain amount of admiration for Emperor Roselle. The woman laughed. Otherwise, Lumion asked, was he powerful? Almost a deity, the lady said concisely. That amazing? Lumion was stunned, but felt that it was only right. He thought for a moment and said, then, wouldn't the diary left behind by Emperor Roselle be very valuable? The lady nodded. Yes, but there are very, very few people who can decipher those strange writings. Lumion fell into deep thought. Aurora seems to have some of Emperor Roselle's diary transcripts in her collection. She seems to be able to decipher them. Could it be that a portion of her strength comes from there? The woman turned her head to look out of Old Tavern's window. It's about time. I'll end this with giving you some pointers. Based on the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility, we know that humans and Beyonder characteristics combine to become Beyonders. Similarly, creatures and Beyonder characteristics combine to become Beyonder creatures. But what about items that combine with Beyonder characteristics? She asked, not giving Lumion a chance to answer. They are called mystical items. As items don't have will, spirit, and self-control, coupled with the combined effects of other factors, after they fuse with Beyonder characteristics, they will not only display corresponding special abilities, but also bring about very strong negative effects. The various churches tend to seal them, and use suitable methods to activate them when needed. This is why mystical items are also called sealed artifacts. The mystical items that have been sealed by the various churches have their own serial numbers, and are divided into 4 grades, 3, 2, 1, and 0. The smaller the prefix number, the higher the danger. Among them, there are a limited number of level 1 and 0 sealed artifacts that are extremely dangerous. The serial numbers are common to the various churches, and won't be repeated. Lumion muttered, level 0 sealed artifacts. Lumion had a deep impression that sequence 0 was equivalent to a true god. This led him to make a certain connection and ask, are these sealed artifacts formed by fallen deities or exterminated evil gods? He had noticed that there were 22 pathways with sequence zeros, but the number of deities clearly didn't add up. However, Lumion also recognized that his lack of understanding of evil gods and secret existences might have caused this confusion. Not all of them, the lady replied after thinking for a moment. Most of them are at the level of angels. Only a small number have the ability to kill gods. Lumion nodded. I understand. I won't underestimate the items in other people's hands. The woman added, you can't underestimate the negative effects of sealed artifacts either. In the future, you will definitely come across sealed artifacts. Oh, and there's another category of items in the field of mysticism called extraordinary items. They are made by Beyonders of corresponding sequences using their abilities, spirituality, or with the help of the spirit world or deities. They don't contain Beyonder characteristics, but they have a certain level of supernatural effects. However, their strength will gradually dissipate over time. Charms, lotions, and other items can only be used once. In comparison, Beyonder weapons are more stable and can be used for years. As a hunter, you lack the ability to deal with spirit body ghost type creatures before sequence 7. If you have the chance in the future, consider obtaining the corresponding sealed artifacts or Beyonder items. Lumion listened carefully and asked, the spirit world? He had seen this term in Hidden Veil, but it did not provide sufficient explanation. The woman quickly explained, from a mystical point of view, This world is divided into 3 levels: the real world, the spirit world, and the astral world. The rest are formed by attaching to one of these 3, like the underworld. I don't need to explain much about the real world. You already know it very well. The spirit world is a place where spirits reside, and many concepts of reality no longer exist there. You will gradually understand it in the future. As for the astral world, it originally referred to the world of gods, but now, the entire cosmos needs to be included in that definition. Lumian was just asking casually, but after obtaining a preliminary answer, he immediately returned to the previous topic. Can a hunter create beyonder items? He asked, thinking that warlocks could probably do it. The lady shook her head before saying, hunters can't rely on their own sequence, but because their spirituality has been enhanced, they can learn ritualistic magic and pray to a deity or a hidden existence. They can use their responses to create charms, weapons, and other beyonder items. However, I have to remind you that most hidden existences are very dangerous. It's best not to attempt praying to them. Otherwise, death would be the best outcome. And the 7 orthodox gods basically won't respond to you unless you join the corresponding church and become an official beyonder. In other words, it's impossible for a hunter to create a beyonder item? Lumian asked, feeling somewhat disappointed. The lady smiled and said, not really. On the one hand, you can use the blood and saliva of certain beyonder creatures to create poisonous weapons. In a sense, this can be considered a beyonder item. On the other hand, after you unlock the secret of the dream, I'll tell you the honorific name of a great existence. You can pray to him. Lumian was shocked and suspicious. This was the first time she had used the word great as an adjective. He had never heard her use it to describe the eternal blazing sun or the hidden sage. Who could this great existence be? Was it safe to pray to him? The more he learned about mysticism, the more he realized how little he knew. Lumian tersely acknowledged her answer and asked, what are the corresponding sequences 8 and 7 for hunters? The woman replied indifferently, sequence 8 of the hunter pathway is called Provoker, and sequence 7 is Pyromaniac. All right, that's all for today, she said as she stood up and walked towards the entrance to the 2nd floor. After a few steps, she stopped and said over her shoulder, I forgot to remind you. Remember, you're just acting. Just acting. Lumian mulled over her words and thoughtfully asked, what if you take the role seriously? You will become less and less like yourself until one day. The woman smiled and closed her mouth before turning around, walking to the stairs and disappearing. She didn't finish her sentence again. Lumian muttered silently. He sensed that forgetting he was only acting would have serious consequences. Lumian sat quietly in a corner of Old Tavern, reviewing the general knowledge the woman had just taught him to prevent forgetting anything. The more he thought about it, the more he realized the importance of the 2 laws and 1 method. They are like the main framework of mysticism. Everything else is derived from them. I wonder if Aurora knows. After leaving Cordu, I'll discuss this problem with her. I wonder if that lady will allow me to inform Aurora of all these directly. As Lumian left Old Tavern, he looked back and muttered to himself, why haven't those 3 foreigners taken action yet? It's already Lent today. He continued to ponder as he made his way to the village square. After he finished asking if there was any reply, he saw Ava, Raimund, and the others approaching. Ava was wearing a long white dress with a round headdress made of branches and flowers on her head, and a huge necklace hung around her neck. Brown branches and green leaves adorned her back, arms, waist, and legs, making her look like a fairy in the forest. She was the main character of Lent, the spring elf. Raimund and the other lads surrounded Ava, each carrying a basket woven from tree branches filled with grass, soil, rocks, leaves, and other items. Lumian, the blessing tour is about to begin, Ava exclaimed when her aqua-blue eyes saw him. Her face was filled with joy. Raimund and the others also looked happy. Come on, let's go get the contributions. Since Novel Weekly had not yet replied, Lumian had nothing to do for the time being, so he decided to join the procession. The young lads began singing loudly as they surrounded Ava and walked out of the square. After about 10 meters, they stopped in front of the first building. Lumian walked to the door and banged on it. The spring elf is here. The door creaked open, and Nasli appeared in front of them. She was the other female head of the family in the village, in her 40s with the prefix Na. Her black hair was tied up, and her blue eyes were smiling. As the door opened, Ava took 2 steps forward, spread her arms and began singing. I'm the elf of spring, with a sweet face and a joyful ring, bringing happiness to everything. In this season so charming, come and sing, come and dance. Let's celebrate this time of chance. For this is the only way to bless the land and make it stay. After the song, Ava took a clump of soil from Raimund's basket and handed it to Nasli. Thank you, Spring Elf, Nasli said, receiving it with a smile and handing a piece of cloth to Ava. Bumper harvest! Bumper harvest! Lumian and the other lads replied in unison. This was a blessing ritual. The Spring Elf used singing and the giving of soil, grass, rocks, and other natural things to the villagers to bless them with a bumper harvest this year. The villagers needed to give something back as a contribution, or the blessing would become a curse. After Raimund received the cloth, Ava sang another song enthusiastically. Only then did they bid farewell to Nasli and head to the next house. A portion of the dedications received during the blessing tour would be thrown into the river in the waterside ritual, and the rest would be placed in the final ritual. After Lent was over, the girl who was the embodiment of the Spring Elf had the right to choose some to take away. This was a considerable gain. If Cordu really experienced a bumper harvest this year, Ava, as the embodiment of the Spring Elf, would be widely believed to have received the love of the elves and blessings of spring. Whoever married her would have bumper harvests all the time. In that case, she had a chance of marrying someone from a good family. The blessing procession sang all the way to Lumian's house, where Aurora opened the door. She had changed into a light-colored pleated dress with a straight collar, and had bunned her blonde hair. Ava walked over and sang the same song again. I'm the elf of spring. Aurora listened with a smile and handed Ava a small pottery jar. Thank you, Spring Elf. Lumian glanced at the jar of animal lard, and felt that his sister was too generous. They had no farmland except for a small vegetable field at the back of their house, and did not need to worry about the harvest at all. Despite feeling the usual pinch, Lumian didn't stop his sister as Ava, Raimund, and the others turned around and walked towards the nearby buildings. He deliberately fell behind and whispered to Aurora, "Call me if you hear back from Novel Weekly." "Don't worry, I'll keep you updated," Aurora replied, giving Lumian a reassuring look. The festive and joyous blessing tour continued with songs as they knocked on the villagers' doors in Cordu. Finally, they arrived at the administrator's residence, which was modified from a castle from the Sauron royal era. It was located on a hill at the edge of Cordu, dark in color with 2 towering towers. The outer walls surrounding the building had long been torn down. Lumian and company passed through the garden specially created by the Beast couple, and arrived at the entrance. The door was 4 to 5 meters tall, a brownish-green color like trees, and looked very heavy. However, it was divided into upper and lower parts, and only needed to open the 2-meter-tall part below, unless welcoming esteemed guests. The Spring Elf was the embodiment of spring, and the messenger of the harvest, so she deserved the most honorable treatment. At this moment, the heavy door was completely opened, and Madame Puali stood there in a light green corset. Her lady's maid, Kathy, stood to the side with a basket woven from tree branches, half a step behind. Ava walked over and sang a song of blessings. Madame Puali's listened quietly with a smile on her face, which made her look noble and reserved. The young men who followed the Spring Elf didn't dare to look at her, but Lumian, who had listened to the other party and the padre doing the deed, scoffed inwardly when he saw this. As the song ended, Ava exchanged the seeds of a tree for a basket of eggs. The blessing tour was over, and Lumian, Raimund, and the other lads escorted Ava, the Spring Elf, to the mountain river not far from the village for the second segment of Lent, the waterside ritual. Arriving at the place where geese were usually herded, Ava approached the clear river and did a simple dance, repeating the song from before. Meanwhile, Lumian and the other lads stood still, 7 to 8 meters away from the Spring Elf. After the dance, Ava took out a chopped turnip from a basket beside her feet, given by a particular villager, and threw it into the river. As she threw, she sang, "A bumper harvest! A bumper harvest!" When Eva was done, Lumion stepped on the ground and ran over in a few steps. He bent down and took out the cut turnips from the basket and threw them into the river. "A bumper harvest! A bumper harvest!" he shouted. The remaining lads were a tad slower than Lumion, but they rushed towards Eva, afraid of falling behind. They took out turnips and radishes from the basket and threw them at different parts of the river, while shouting "Bumper harvest." Raimund failed to take the initiative and couldn't beat the others, so he was the last to complete the ritual. The next second he saw the malicious smiles of Lumion, Guillaume Jr., and the others. They lifted Raimund up, shouting "Bumper harvest," and threw him into the water with a splash. Raimund was drenched from head to toe. The people on the shore even picked up soil and branches and threw them at him. This was part of the waterside ritual. The person who completed the last prayer would be thrown into the river and not allowed to go ashore. They could only swim a little further down and quietly return home to hide until it was dark. Raimund wiped the water droplets off his face and struggled for a few seconds before heading downstream. Only then did the team escort Eva to the Eternal Blazing Sun Cathedral at the edge of Cordes Square. It was almost noon. Most of the villagers, including Lumion's sister Aurora, had gathered at the cathedral, which was not as grand as those in the city. The tallest one was only 11 to 12 meters, with a dome and an arc that looked like an onion from the outside. Looking up from the inside, a dazzling sun mural greeted their eyes. The entire cathedral was golden in color and looked very bright, which was also the common style of all the Eternal Blazing Sun cathedrals. The altar was located in the east, and all kinds of sunflowers surrounded a huge sacred emblem. On the surface of the sacred emblem, the golden ball and the lines representing light formed a symbol filled with mysticism, the symbol of the eternal blazing sun. High up on the wall behind the altar, there were 2 pure glass windows inlaid with gold foil. Every day, when the sun rose, the light would shine from here onto the sacred emblem. On the west side of the cathedral, there were 2 similar glass windows to take in the glow of the setting sun. As this was not a formal ritual of the church, but a traditional celebration of the people, Padre Guillaume Binet did not appear. Instead, Administrator Beist hosted the celebration with Eva, who was still dressed as a spring elf, standing next to him. Musical instruments such as flutes and lyres sounded, and the villagers sang songs that praised spring and prayed for a bumper harvest. They hadn't rehearsed, so the singing wasn't uniform, and some people even sang and danced, making the scene lively. Lumion's mouth opened and closed, but he didn't make a sound. He was simply going through the motions. On the other hand, Aurora, who was beside him, was engrossed in her singing, taking the opportunity to have fun and raise her voice. As he was only going through the motions, Lumion had time to look around. He didn't notice any abnormalities in the villagers' behavior. He subconsciously looked up at the golden sun mural on the dome. Then he saw it, the thing he couldn't quite put his finger on. The villagers weren't praising the sun. For a village that worshipped the eternal blazing sun, this was strange. Words like "praise the sun" and "my God, my Father" were staples of daily life, but Lumion realized he hadn't heard them in a while. As a quasi-believer, and having skipped activities in the cathedral since crossing the Padre, Lumion hadn't thought much of it before. But something about the solemn and golden atmosphere of the cathedral made him realize that this was not normal. And then he remembered the letter of help that he had reconstructed, the urgent plea for assistance from someone in the village. "We need help as soon as possible. The people around us are getting weirder. The people around us are getting weirder." At that moment, Lumion gained a deeper understanding and agreement with this sentence. Lumion's heart raced as he looked around, searching for Leah and the other foreigners. But they were nowhere to be found at this Lenten celebration. Seriously, they don't appear when they're needed, Lumion muttered inwardly. Lumion forced himself to join in the chorus, pretending not to notice anything out of the ordinary. Finally, the singing died down, and the celebration ended. Lumion whispered to Aurora, his voice urgent, "Go home first. I have something to tell you later." He knew he couldn't leave yet. As an escort for the spring elf, he had to participate in the final part of the ritual. He couldn't force his way out of the cathedral, risking an anomalous eruption. Aurora nodded thoughtfully. Okay. She didn't ask further, and left the cathedral with Madame Pualis and the other villagers, leaving Lumion behind. The cathedral was empty, save for Lumion and a handful of lads who had participated in the blessing tour. Ava, the embodiment of the spring elf, stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the contributions, symbolic items that hadn't been thrown into the river. Herbs, axes, shovels, whips, and goose sticks. Lumion and his companions had to wait for someone to come in from outside and announce the departure of the spring elf before they could take off her crown, necklace, branches, and leaves. During this process, they needed to leave a gap for the spring elf to leave Ava's body. In just 20 to 30 seconds, footsteps echoed from the cathedral's entrance. Lumion instinctively looked up. Two figures entered the cathedral. The thin shepherd Pierre Barry had rushed back to attend Lent. His eyes were sunken, and he wore a dark brown long coat with a hood. He had tied a rope around his waist and was sporting new black leather shoes. But what caught Lumion's attention was that his greasy black hair was now clean and smooth. Even his messy beard had been tidied, and it was now neater and shorter than before. As usual, there was a faint smile in his blue eyes. The other man was Padre Guillaume Benet, adorned in a white robe with gold threads, befitting of his role as a clergyman. He had sparse black hair and a slightly hooked nose, but he exuded a dignified aura. Despite standing at less than 1.7 meters tall, he still seemed to tower over Shepherd Pierre Barry. The Padre? Why did he come? Lumion was surprised and puzzled. As a clergyman of the Eternal Blazing Sun Church, he had no business being here. At a folk celebration that didn't include a segment to praise the sun. Lumion's mind jolted as he recognized that the Padre and his group were previously up to something sinister, especially considering his past conflict with them. He quickly retreated to the side of the stained glass, moving slowly and silently to avoid drawing attention to himself. The group hadn't yet surrounded Ava, the spring elf, so they were standing in different places, making Lumion's actions inconspicuous. Ava was surprised to see the Padre, but she quickly remembered his importance in the village. It made sense for him to announce the end of the Lent celebration. She smiled once again. Padre Guillaume Benet and Shepherd Pierre Barry approached Ava, and the former spoke in a deep voice. Send the spring elf off. Other than Lumion, people rushed forward to surround Ava. Send the spring elf off. Shepherd Pierre Barry shouted as he bent his back with a smile. Not good. Lumion's heart raced as he stepped forward, his body reacting before his mind could catch up. But it was too late. Shepherd Pierre Barry picked up an axe from the pile of symbolic items, and with a tight grip and a powerful swing, the axe came cleaving down. Blood spurted from Ava's neck, forming a thick red mist. Thud. Lumion watched in horror as Ava's head fell to the ground and rolled a few times in the blood, finally stopping, head facing up. She still had a look of joy in her eyes. Having just taken 2 steps in her direction, Lumion's heart sank. He immediately turned around and turned to flee towards the stained glass. The cloth, jars, and eggs that were splattered with blood, along with the sickening stench, failed to elicit a reaction from Padre Guillaume Benet. He turned his body and locked his gaze on a particular spot in the cathedral, where Lumion's figure was reflected in his blue eyes. The color of the Padre's eyes shifted, turning so ethereal that they appeared transparent. Lumion was surrounded by complicated silver symbols that coiled around him like small rivers. He ran through an illusory river that was formed from these symbols, with blurry tributaries ahead of him. Guillaume Benet reached out his right hand and grabbed a mercury-colored symbol that encircled Lumion. Lumion stomped his right foot, preparing to hurl himself through the stained glass and out of the cathedral. But he slipped and couldn't muster enough strength, and his body was sent flying. With a loud bang, whoosh, and cracking sound, Lumion shattered the stained glass depicting Saint Sith, but he failed to break through it, and instead crashed back into the cathedral. His body was covered in cuts and blood flowed freely. Shepherd Pierre Barry, who had earlier decapitated Ava with an axe, locked onto Lumion. His gentle smile belied the ferocity in his blue eyes, as if a seal inside him had been undone, revealing his true nature. Pierre Barry charged at Lumion with the axe, his body seeming to grow taller and stronger with every step. Lumion leaned against the broken stained glass window, his back facing the ruthless shepherd. Lumion struggled to free himself from the pain of being stabbed as he fell heavily to the ground. As he propped himself up with his hands to roll out of the cathedral, an abnormal sense of danger washed over him. Someone's behind me, he realized. Ignoring the pain and blood, he continued pressing down on the broken glass window frame and pretended to roll out, using it as a cover to quickly retract his body and fall back instead of moving forward. Bang! Suddenly, an axe smashed into the window frame, sending it flying out of the cathedral with a loud bang. Lumion rolled backward, narrowly avoiding Pierre Barry's violent attack as he lunged past his feet. But he didn't feel relieved. Pierre Barry had blocked his only escape route, forcing him back into the cathedral. Despite having read countless novels, Lumion knew he couldn't rely on simply rolling to avoid getting hit. As he brushed past Pierre Barry, he quickly propped himself up with his elbow, exerted strength from his waist, and bounced up. He surveyed the scene and realized that, besides Guillaume Jr. and a few others, all the lads had lost their minds and turned deranged. They ignored Ava's headless corpse and the blood that stained the ground, shouting excitedly, "Send the spring elf off! Send the spring elf off!" Guillaume Jr. and a few others stood in shock, staring at Ava's wide, smiling eyes without moving. Fear, panic, and disbelief etched their faces, as if trapped in an unbreakable nightmare. Pierre Barry loomed over Lumion, appearing taller than the cathedral dome. His axe missed, but he quickly retracted it and swung at Lumion again. Lumion deftly dodged the attack and ran off despite not even finding his footing. Thud thud thud. Lumion fully utilized the hunter's speed and agility as he ran in an arc. Target the Padre. He knew he had to deal with the leader, no matter how the others attacked him. He put on a fierce stance, determined to either let them allow him to flee or die trying with him. Only in this way could a miracle be created in a very unfavorable situation. Shepherd Pierre Barry didn't pursue Lumion. He stood in front of the broken window frame, holding his blood-stained axe, and extending his left hand towards Lumion's direction. The cathedral plunged into darkness, and Lumion's surroundings grew even more ominous. Seemingly coming to life, the abyss swayed gently, like a curtain behind which pale white pitch black, and strange arms were poised to strike. Padre Guillaume Benet's eyes were nearly transparent, with Lumion's figure submerged in an illusory river formed by shimmering mercury symbols. In front of him, he saw something similar but more surreal, as if representing the future or a tributary. After experimenting, Guillaume Benet's right hand finally grasped the key pattern formed by multiple symbols. With a single move, he could rewrite Lumion's future and render all his efforts futile. But suddenly, the Padre's eyes froze, and he let out a scream. His eyes shut tightly as blood and turbid tears streamed down his face. Amidst his scream, his body expanded like a balloon being filled with gas, and his white robe with golden threads cracked under the strain. His skin turned nearly transparent, revealing the bizarre mark that had been hidden beneath his clothes. The black marks that resembled a seal connected to an indescribable world. The terrifying aura they emitted filled the cathedral, leaving the lads who were still sending off the spring elf in a state of extreme terror. They either ran around the offerings, knelt on the ground, or prostrated themselves on the floor, afraid to look up. Guillaume Jr. and a few others fainted from fear, leaving pools of urine and a foul stench. Shepherd Pierre Barry was about to use his mystic arts to grab Lumion when he threw away his axe and knelt on one knee, bowing his head and ceasing all movement. Lumion was the only one who remained unaffected in the entire cathedral. Although he felt an abnormal pain in his head, it was nothing compared to the mysterious voice that had nearly killed him. He also felt a burning sensation in his chest, suspecting that the black thorny chain symbol had appeared, along with the bluish-black symbol resembling an eye and worms. However, he had no time to check his physical condition or understand why he suddenly had the upper hand. He continued to run towards Padre Guillaume Benet, determined not to let any opportunity slip by. As he got closer, Lumion could clearly see the unique black marks resembling seals made up of strange symbols and words. His gaze quickly swept around, and he noticed something familiar. black symbols resembling thorns that drilled out of the left chest of Padre Guillaume Bennett and circled behind him. It was identical to Lumien's chest but much lighter. He has one too. Lumien's heart trembled. Is this the root cause of the abnormality in the village? Why do I have it? When did I get it? Thoughts quickly surfaced in Lumien's mind, but he didn't let them distract him from his movements. He ran towards Guillaume Bennett, stretched out his right arm, and wrapped it around the enemy's head. Without pausing, he forcefully circled behind the Padre, and with a snap, Guillaume Bennett's head turned and faced his spine. Phew! Lumien breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the biggest problem had been resolved. He had to hurry home and escape with his sister, leaving the rest to the three foreigners to deal with. But just as Lumien turned to leave, Guillaume Bennett, who was supposed to be dead, opened his eyes. They were bloodshot, and a sharp buzz split Lumien's head in half, the intense pain preventing him from screaming. Everything shattered before his eyes, and he was engulfed in darkness as he lost consciousness. Painful! How painful! Lumien suddenly sat up, opened his eyes and rubbed his head. He saw the familiar surroundings of his bedroom. The wooden table, the reclining chair, and the wardrobe and small bookshelves on both sides. I was saved by Grande Sir? How long was I out? How is the situation in the cathedral? Lumien didn't have the time to think through it. Without wasting any time, Lumien got off the bed, held his head and rushed out. He found Aurora in the kitchen on the first floor, wearing a light blue dress and preparing dinner. Lumien shouted, "Aurora! Grande Sir, we need to run. The Padre and many people in the village have gone crazy. They killed Ava at the end of the celebration." He wasn't sure if his sister knew about the incident, so he got straight to the point. After all, there were many ways to be saved, and it did not mean that she had to be at the scene. Aurora turned around, looking confused, and asked, "Celebration? The Lent celebration?" "Yes." Lumien nodded vigorously. Aurora smiled. "That was one hell of a story. 2 sentences, and you've got me feeling all kinds of scared. But listen, you gotta be more careful with your tales. Lent's still a few days away." Lumien was stunned. Lumien gazed into Aurora's eyes for a moment before slowly asking, "How many days until Lent?" He suspected his sister was trying to prank him, but he had never known her to be flippant about important matters. This was a crucial moment that would impact the whole village, and possibly even their survival. Aurora sized him up and quipped, "Did you not take an afternoon nap? Are you still not fully awake? It's March 29th, 1358. We still have a few days before Lent." March 29. Lumien ruminated the date for a moment, and wondered if he was dreaming. He had vividly experienced Lent, a period of merriment that ended in a bloodbath. He had witnessed Shepherd Pierre Barry hack off Ava's head with an axe and blood spurt everywhere. Was he dreaming now, or had his past experience been a dream? Regardless of which one it was, they both seemed too real. Lumien couldn't detect any signs of deceit on his sister's face. Sure, Aurora could be an excellent actress, but Lumien believed she was not that kind of person. They had spent 5 years together, and he knew every detail of her personality. There was no way she could have fooled him. Lumien was perplexed as he considered the possibilities of his sister Aurora lying to him about the date. Either she was being controlled by the Padre, or some secret entity, or everything had been resolved, and she was just messing with him. If neither of these options was true, then it was likely that Aurora was telling the truth. Time had rewound to March 29th, a few days before Lent. With Lumien's understanding of the world, this was clearly impossible and shouldn't have happened. However, his sister's attitude left him at a loss. "I have to think of a way to confirm it." Lumien tried to recall everything that had happened during that time period, and realized he could easily remember most of the details. Aurora was wearing a light blue dress on that day on the March 29th, corresponding to the successful celebration of Lent. He also remembered meeting Leah, Ryan, and Valentine that night before taking them to the cathedral to catch the Padre in the act. "What's wrong?" Aurora stretched out her right hand and waved it in front of her stunned brother. Lumien quickly gathered his thoughts and said, "Aurora, I just remembered something. I need to go out for a while. I'll be back soon." Lumien realized that the only way to confirm if time had really returned to March 29th was to find Ava. If she was still alive, he would have to come to terms with this unbelievable change. He didn't wait for Aurora's response and hurried to the door, bypassing her. "Call me Grande, sir. Don't be late for dinner," Aurora shouted after him. As he ran towards Ava Lizier's house, Lumion feared that if he were even a second slower, he would be caught in an indescribable nightmare and completely devoured. Along the way, many villagers noticed him, but they were afraid it was a prank directed by him, and didn't stop to ask for a reason. Finally, Lumion reached his destination. Guillaume Lizier, Ava's father, was a famous shoemaker in the village of Cordoue and the surrounding mountains. Although they weren't particularly rich, they weren't too bad either. They lived in a subterranean grayish-blue two-story building with an empty space at the back where grass and firewood were piled up, and a goose house was repaired. It was almost dinner time when Lumion arrived, and several figures were busy in the kitchen of the Lizier's household. Lumion walked through the open door and immediately saw Ava. This brown-haired girl with aqua-blue eyes was wearing a gray-white dress and preparing dinner for her mother. Her hands and feet were nimble, and her eyes were lively. Lumion could tell just by looking at her that she was alive. "She's really not dead," Lumion thought to himself as he looked at Ava's neck, trying to find signs of stitches. In one of Aurora's horror novels, there was a scene where a corpse was stitched up to act as a living person. But Ava's neck was long and smooth, without a single scar. Guillaume Lizier, the shoemaker, noticed Lumion standing in the doorway and asked, "Lumion, what's the matter?" He stood up from his kitchen chair and faced Lumion, his brown hair disheveled, and a slightly greasy brownish-white apron hanging in front of him. Ava, who had been busy in the kitchen, turned around in surprise and looked at Lumion. She saw Lumion standing there in a daze. "What's the matter?" she asked. Lumion was momentarily stunned, but quickly regained his composure and planned to make up a random reason to explain his visit. However, Guillaume Lizier inspired him with a question. He deliberated for a moment and asked, "Monsieur, did Pierre of Berry order a pair of leather shoes from you?" He remembered that he and Raymond were supposed to meet Shepherd Pierre Berry the next morning, and were surprised when he had abandoned his flock to rush back to participate in the Lenten celebration, despite the dangers of the long and difficult journey. By that time, Pierre Berry had already put on a new pair of soft leather shoes. Unless he went to a shoe shop in Darige that sold finished products, it would take time to make a pair of leather shoes. This meant that Pierre Berry had been back in the village for at least 2 or 3 days. Guillaume Lizier was surprised by Lumion's question and said, "Pierre Berry came back a few days ago, but not many people in the village know about it. He also told me not to tell anyone else." As expected, Lumion made up a reason and said, "I saw someone who looked very much like him, and thought I was hallucinating. Because the man was wearing new leather shoes, I came to confirm it with you. It's him." Guillaume Lizier gave an affirmative answer. He was still herding 3 or 4 sheep that he claimed his employer had given him. "Don't they only let the sheep return to the village in early May to shear and milk them? How are they to be grazed if a few sheep are brought back now? Grazing in the highland pastures is still prohibited." The more Lumion thought about it, the more he felt that Shepherd Pierre Berry's behavior was extremely abnormal. And his performance at the end of the celebration proved Lumion's judgment. However, he had no idea what he, the Padre, and the others wanted to do, or what they had already done. Lumion smiled at Guillaume Lizier and Ava and said, "I'm relieved that it's really him. I thought I was having problems with my brain and eyes because I drink too much." He then waved at the Liziers and said, "Goodbye." As Lumion left the Lizier's house, the smile on his face disappeared quickly. He was now very confident that today was really March 29th. Did I go back in time? Or did I have a precognitive dream? Dreams can't be that real. They're so real that every detail is there. Lumion thought hard as he walked. Either way, it was something he had only read about in Aurora's novels, and never imagined would happen in reality. On his way home, Lumion circled the square, and came to the side of the Eternal Blazing Sun Cathedral. The stained glass window, which should have been completely shattered, was perfectly embedded in the wall, and the Saint Sith missionary illustration on the surface shone brightly under the sunset. Lumion watched this scene with mixed feelings. Many thoughts threatened to emit smoke from all the friction against each other in his mind. On his way back to the square, Lumian saw a familiar figure walk out of the cathedral's main entrance. It was the Padre Guillaume Binet, who had a slightly hooked nose and a dignified aura, and he was wearing a white robe with golden threads. Lumian's heart tightened, and he arched his body slightly, preparing himself for an attack or to flee. Guillaume Binet glanced at him and nodded expressionlessly. "Come again tomorrow for prayers." "Ah, that's right. He hasn't been caught red-handed by me during the early evening of March 29th. He hasn't fallen out with me, nor is there any worry that his secret plot is about to be exposed." With this in mind, Lumian instinctively reacted. He stood up straight and spread his arms. "Praise the sun! Praise the sun!" Guillaume Binet replied with the same pose. After leaving the village square, Lumian habitually recalled what had just happened. Suddenly, he discovered a point that he had neglected previously, because he was shocked by time reversal. He still had his superpowers. He was still a hunter. He had not needed to catch his breath from running all the way to the Liziers, and he had immediately put on the best posture when facing the Padre. This meant that his physique and corresponding condition far exceeded the time before he consumed the potion. From this, Lumian made a judgment that the previous experience was not a precognitive dream, and he was already a Sequence 9 Beyonder. "I'll try entering that special dream at night to see if I can still enter, and if there are any changes." Lumian quickly came up with the next step of his plan. After returning home, Lumian pretended as if nothing had happened and had dinner with his sister Aurora. As he often acted this way because he didn't want her to help clean up the mess every time he got into trouble, Aurora didn't ask any further despite sensing that something was off. After washing the cutlery and cleaning the kitchen, Lumian informed his sister and went straight to Old Tavern. He wanted to confirm if the foreigners who didn't hail from Cordoue would appear. After entering Old Tavern, Lumian sat at the bar counter and greeted the boss and bartender, Maurice Binet, and the thin middle-aged man Pierre Guillaume. "A glass of whiskey sour," he said with great familiarity. Whiskey sour referred to low-quality alcohol brewed from apples. It was only more expensive than some beer in taverns. People often hawked it on the streets of the city. Maurice Binet nagged, "Stingy brat, don't you like the pain of absinthe?" Lumian said the familiar words, "Is it on the house?" This made his mind feel a little adrift. Maurice Binet immediately stopped talking and poured a glass of whiskey sour for Lumian. Lumian sipped his drink as he waited. Not long after, he heard tinkling sounds. He turned around to see Ryan wearing a rough dark bowler hat, a drab duffel coat, and pale yellow strides. Leah attracted the attention of almost all the men in Old Tavern with her white pleated cashmere dress, off-white coat, Marseillan boots, and small silver bells tied to her boots and veil. Similarly, Valentine wore a white vest, a blue tweed jacket, and black trousers, with his blonde hair covered in a little powder. The three of them walked to the bar counter under everyone's gazes and sat down beside Lumian. Lumian didn't look up as he thought to himself, a glass of Durige red wine, a glass of rye beer, and a glass of Cur Epis. Ryan took off his top hat and put it aside. Then he said to Maurice Binet, "A glass of Durige red wine, a glass of rye beer, and a glass of Cur Epis." Lumian let out a long sigh, and Ryan asked, "What's wrong?" Lumian took a sip of his whiskey sour and said in a deep voice, "I'm a nobody, with no time to notice the brightness of the sun." Lumian intended to observe, so he went through the entire process of getting to know Leah and her companions until they arrived outside the Cathedral of the Eternal Blazing Sun. He confirmed that these three foreigners really didn't know him and weren't on guard against his corresponding prank. Has time really rewound? Lumian was momentarily in a daze. Valentine said his lines as he looked at the magnificent building in front of him that had blended into the night. "We've been here before. There's no one here." Lumian composed himself and stopped following the procedure. He said directly, "That's because the Padre doesn't want to bother with you." He planned on leaving the impression on these three foreigners, who were suspected to be official Beyonders, that he liked to joke but meant no harm. Leah thought of several possibilities and asked, "You're saying that the Padre is in the cathedral, but isn't responding to the knocks due to certain matters?" Lumian smiled. "It's not suitable to have others see you having an affair in the cathedral." After saying this, He instinctively muttered in his heart, "Unfortunately, I can't hear the classic line, 'You've ruined the Holy Church's plans,' this time." Of course, after learning more about Madame Pualis, he felt that what the Padre said was not entirely unreasonable. Perhaps Padres could be like the main characters in Aurora's spy novels, who were willing to endure temporary humiliation and betray their bodies to infiltrate the evil forces, represented by Madame Pualis, to complete an important mission. Valentine's cold attitude changed as he asked anxiously, "Having an affair in the cathedral?" Lumion spread his hands. "What's the problem? The Padre does this every day. Relax. Isn't there a saying that goes, throughout the ages, it has remained unchanged? Men will always pursue women." Valentine snapped, "But this is a cathedral." Lumion thought for a moment and asked curiously, "So, as long as the clergyman doesn't have the affair in the cathedral, it's acceptable?" "This is blasphemy against God." Valentine was on the verge of exploding. Ryan placated him with a pat on the shoulder, and the most composed foreigner in the group asked, "Do you know who the Padre is having an affair with tonight?" Lumion shook his head. "There are too many possibilities. His mistresses include Madame Pualis, Madonna Benet, Philippa Guillaume, and Sybil Berry." "Madonna Benet? She has the same last name as the Padre," Leah interjected. Lumion nodded. "She and the Padre are cousins twice removed." Valentine was stunned for a moment. He gritted his teeth and asked, "Is Guillaume Benet a servant of God or a servant of the demon? Do you only know this line? Why don't I see you blowing up his head?" Lumion deliberately defended the Padre. "It's actually nothing. In Dirige we have a saying, 'Distant cousins, feel free to sleep together.'" Leah laughed, tinkling the silver bell on her head. "Why do you have so many sayings?" Lumion spread his hands again. "That's just how it is in the countryside." Ryan interjected thoughtfully, "How do you know that we're not from Dirige? You wouldn't have said, 'In Dirige there's a saying.' You told me this yourself." Lumion had been quick to shoot off his tongue, and actually treated what had happened previously as information that he already knew. He had no choice but to make up a reason. "You don't look like Dirige locals." He pointed to the road leading to the village and said, "I've already helped you find the Padre. I have to go home now." Leah smiled faintly and said, "I thought you'd follow us." "I don't dare offend the Padre," Lumion casually mentioned. "The villager who snitched on him previously has been missing for a long time." Without waiting for Ryan and the others to respond, he waved his hand and ran to the other side of the square, saying, "Remember to keep my secret, my cabbages." Lumion walked along a starlit country road, the crimson moon obscured by clouds. He pondered recent events, his hands in pocket. As he neared his home, he looked up at the roof of the semi-subterranean two-story building. As expected, Aurora sat there, hugging her knees and gazing at the cosmos. In the darkness, she seemed lonely and distant. "It has really repeated. Is there a possibility that what happened previously is real, and I'm dreaming now?" Lumion had just come up with a new guess, when he suddenly realized the difference between the two March 29 THS. He realized that the woman who had given him the wand card and taught him mysticism knowledge was absent from Old Tavern, preventing him from determining if he was dreaming or not. "I'll do a confirmation tomorrow." Lumion composed himself, walked to his house, and pushed the door open. Just like last time, Lumion climbed to the roof using the ladder on the second floor and sat beside Aurora. "What's so interesting about this view?" Lumion said deliberately. Aurora turned her head and sighed. Just as she was about to speak, Lumion added, "I mean, what does the cosmos mean to you?" Aurora sized him up. "You're being rather direct today." She then looked at the cosmos and said faintly, "As you know, I'm not from Cordoue or Dirige. I don't know if you've ever heard the saying, that home is where you can't return to." Lumion didn't joke as he looked into the cosmos. Aurora proceeded to fly into her bedroom and write a letter to her pen pal. Lumion didn't reveal his newfound Beyonder status. He returned to the second floor, chatted with his sister about her pen pals, then closed Aurora's door and returned to his bedroom. Upon seeing the white four-piece bed, Lumion's heart skipped a beat. He lifted the pillow and found the Minor Arcana tarot card representing the Seven of Wands. Looking at the man in verdant attire with a determined expression on his face, his hand holding a wand, poised for battle against his enemies, Lumian remembered the woman's interpretation of the card: crisis, challenge, confrontation, courage. The more Lumian thought about it, the more he felt that these 4 words truly revealed his current situation. Before drawing the card, there was a high chance that he would enter a crisis and face challenges. What I need to do next is to muster my courage and confront the problem. Wait, hasn't time already turned back? I haven't even met that lady or drawn the card. Why is it here? Lumian was alarmed. He wasn't too confident about his previous guesses. All kinds of thoughts and deductions quickly emerged in his mind, like bubbles bubbling in boiling water. This made Lumian's head hurt. He felt like he was about to go crazy. In the end, Lumian decided to treat the woman and the item she gave him as an exception for the time being. With that lady's mysteriousness and uniqueness, it was considered normal for her to be unaffected by time reversal. If I can find her tomorrow, and she still knows me, it means that there's nothing wrong with my deduction. Lumian exhaled, feeling mentally exhausted. He went to the washroom to wash up, and went to bed early. Lumian woke up in the familiar, faint gray fog and sat up, seeing the wooden table and chair in front of the window. He had once again entered the special dream. Upon discovering that the wand card still existed, Lumian knew he could enter. Lumian subconsciously touched the inner pocket of his clothes, and his expression froze. The gold coins were gone. All the gold coins were gone. Lumian hurriedly jumped off the bed and searched his entire body and the spot where he had been lying, but couldn't find them. He didn't even have 1 kopek worth of copper coins. Time has reversed here too? Lumian suddenly had such a guess. He looked around and didn't see the shotgun, axe, or pitchfork that should have been there. He calmed himself and walked down to the first floor, where he found the pitchfork and hand axe in their original locations, identical to his first exploration of the dream ruins. Similarly, the bucket of corn oil had not been placed beside the stove. As for the shotgun, Lumian searched everywhere but didn't find it. Lumian believed more and more that time had turned back in the dream. I'll check the ruins and see if the 2 monsters are still there, Lumian muttered to himself silently. He picked up his axe and opened the door. Not long after, he passed through the wilderness filled with crevices and weeds, and arrived at the edge of the ruins. Unlike the first time he explored this place, as a hunter, he noticed many traces left behind by living creatures, including 2 that often appeared in the area when he put his mind to it. He followed one set of footprints to the half-collapsed house. If I had such superpowers in the past, how could I have nearly been ambushed during my first exploration? Lumian carried his axe and entered the building. He went straight to his destination and arrived in front of the shattered pottery jar. A sliver of gold seeped out from inside. Lumian bent over and picked up the Louis d'Or. It was the same lustrous color as the first time Lumian picked it up. Indeed, time has reversed. With very few exceptions, everything has returned to the original state. Lumian sighed. Suddenly, he took 2 quick steps forward, twisted his waist, and half-turned to the right. As he exerted his strength, the axe in his hand cleaved out. The skinless blood-colored monster lost sight of its target just as it pounced from the roof. What greeted it was an axe. Puffed! Its head flew out, and its headless body fell heavily to the ground amidst the blood and pus. It's about as strong as the last time, Lumian muttered to himself, as he looked at the corpse of the skinless monster. Before the time reversal, he had been evenly matched with the monster, relying on his intelligence to defeat it. Now as a Beyonder, he only needed 1 swing of his axe to finish it off. Of course, he had the advantage of already experiencing the same sequence of events, and knowing the monster's attack strategy. This allowed him to anticipate its moves. The contrast between before and after made Lumian feel that he had undergone a significant improvement after becoming a Beyonder. After pondering for a moment, he moved the monster's corpse and head to a corner, but did not hide it under rocks, wood and mud, leaving it exposed along with the blood on the ground. Lumian then quickly searched the half-collapsed building and found the remaining 197 vol d'or and 25 kopek, categorizing them into different pockets. He flipped through the lever blue again, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Once he had completed his search, he snuck deeper into the ruins. However, after only 20 to 30 meters, he changed course and returned to his starting point. Following the path the skinless monster had taken while alive, he nimbly climbed onto the half-collapsed roof. After making the necessary preparations, he hid himself. Minute by minute, Lumion waited patiently like an experienced hunter. After an unknown period of time, a figure emerged from the ruins. It was the same monster that had previously given Lumion a hunter-beyonder characteristic, with its half-human, half-beast appearance, bent knees, greasy black hair, and shotgun on its back. The shotgun monster approached cautiously, as if on a daily patrol. Suddenly it sniffed the air, and detected the blood in the distance. It quickly changed direction, and headed towards the half-collapsed, burnt building. Following the trail of blood, the monster found the skinless monster's corpse and head. It squatted down to examine it carefully. On the half-collapsed roof, Lumion shook his head and muttered to himself, "You can't even smell me from such a distance? Even with the smell of blood, you shouldn't have missed me." As he muttered, he raised his axe and struck hard at the crevice in the stone beside him that he had prepared earlier. Crash! The half-collapsed roof shook, and heavy rocks crashed down. The shotgun monster reacted quickly, twisting its waist, kicking its feet, and lunging towards an uncollapsed area. Lumion smiled and swooped down from the intact roof, like an eagle grabbing its prey in midair. In the midst of the howling wind, Lumion and the shotgun monster clashed in the air. Lumion raised his axe with one hand, while the monster desperately tried to turn around and block. Lumion clenched his left hand into a fist and punched down. As the monster extended its arm to block, Lumion opened his palm and reduced his strength, grabbing the monster's arm. As Lumion pulled back with his left hand, he suddenly cleaved down with his axe in his right hand. The blade struck the monster, and they both fell to the ground in a pool of blood. Lumion, who had a buffer pad, was not affected by the impact. He raised his hand and cleaved the monster's head from its body with his axe once again. Despite its unwillingness, the head rolled twice and separated from the body. Standing up, Lumion looked at the monster and sneered, "You've weakened. All you have is a terrifying shell, nothing more than a stuffed scarecrow inside." As a hunter, he was confident in dealing with the shotgun monster again, but he hadn't expected it to be so easy. Looking at the corpse on the ground, Lumion patiently waited for the beyonder characteristic to appear. However, after waiting for a long time, he saw no sign of the dark red light. "Nothing," Lumion muttered to himself in puzzlement. He wasn't surprised, though. Last time, he had obtained the shotgun monster's beyonder characteristic and turned it into a potion that he had already consumed. Since the time reversal didn't turn me back into an ordinary person, and the beyonder characteristic in my body hasn't disappeared, it means that there's one less hunter beyonder characteristic here. The shotgun monster is only back in its living state, but it essentially lacks what's important. The question now is, why am I still the same before the time reversal? He couldn't come up with an answer, so he decided to loot the copper coins from the shotgun monster and leave the ruins. The next morning, Lumion didn't feign a headache in front of his sister like he had on March 30th. Instead, he got up early and prepared breakfast, including toast, fried poached eggs, sliced bacon, and more. Aurora was surprised to see Lumion's diligence. "Oh, you're so diligent. I thought you wouldn't be able to get up this morning, after drinking so much yesterday." Lumion casually replied, "Just a glass of apple whiskey sour, and a glass of absinthe. How is that too much?" Aurora shook her head and smiled. "What's there to be proud of? Other than wine, other alcoholic beverages are unhealthy and affect our brains. No wonder you're becoming more and more stupid, my drunkard brother." Lumion, who couldn't argue with his sister, muttered to himself, "Why is wine an exception?" "Because I like it," Aurora replied, challenging Lumion to retort. Lumion had no response. After breakfast, he stayed home and kneaded dough instead of going out. Aurora clicked her tongue in wonder. "Did you cause any trouble? You're so obedient. Tell me, I won't beat you up. At most, I'll give you an additional combat class." "Nothing." Lumion deflected the question and said, "I find things in the village getting weirder and weirder. Some people are acting more and more abnormally. Aurora, do you feel that way?" Lumion had observed that his sister didn't have any memories related to the time reversal, but the abnormality in the village had to have started before March 29th. As a mystery prior, Aurora might have sensed it, but didn't pay enough attention to it. Aurora's expression turned serious. Even you can sense that something is amiss? Tell me, who were the ones who made you feel this way? As expected, Aurora knew that there was something wrong with some people, but she didn't expect the problem to be so serious. Lumion washed his hands and thought before responding. Madame Pualis, the Padre, Pons Binet, and the shepherd Pierre Barry, who returned to the village early. There is indeed something wrong with Madame Pualis. I knew something was off about her when she came to Cordoue with the administrator. But she was very restrained. Apart from constantly having extramarital relationships, there was nothing evil about her. I saw something on her. Aurora stopped herself, not wanting to drag Lumion into the supernatural world. Constantly having extramarital affairs? Before Lumion found out that Madame Pualis was having an affair with the Padre, he found Madame Pualis a decent lady. He was surprised to learn that Madame Pualis had affairs with men other than the Padre. Of course, this was in line with Lumion's stereotypical view of Madame Pualis. As for the Padre, he has the same strong desire for superpowers as you. But he has never received the blessings of the eternal blazing sun church, Aurora continued. A guy like Pons Binet, whose brain is nothing but muscle, can't do anything strange. As for the shepherd Pierre Barry, rushing back a few sheep seems a little off, but I can't tell what's wrong, and I don't dare to look deeper. As one would expect from a sequence 7 of the mystery prior pathway, before the time reversal, I hadn't conversed much with Grande Sir about such topics. In fact, I overlooked the crucial hint that there could be an issue with Pierre Barry's sheep. Yes, I didn't suspect Pierre Barry much back then. I just thought it was a bit odd for him to hurry back early to take part in Lent. Just as Lumion was about to speak, there was a tinkling sound at the door. The doorbell rang. Lumion walked over to the door and asked, "Who is it?" "A telegram for Aurora," the person outside replied loudly. "A telegram?" Aurora was confused. "Who would send me a telegram? There's nothing urgent recently." Lumion was also puzzled. They hadn't received any telegrams before the time reversal on March 30th. Wait, Lumion thought. I went to the village square early on March 30th to wait for Raymond. Perhaps Grande Sir received a telegram, but didn't tell me. Lumion quickly opened the door. Outside stood Bertrand, the administrator's subordinate in charge of telegrams. He handed a piece of paper to Lumion and said, "One vril d'or." The brown-haired, brown-eyed Bertrand was not from Cordoue, and had come here with the administrator from Dirige. He looked warm on the outside, but was actually quite greedy. Lumion tossed a silver coin worth 1 vril d'or to Bertrand, and looked at the telegram. The contents were simple. Lumion quickly browsed through it. The author salon mentioned before is in June. If you're willing, Miss Aurora, you can set off for Trier now. Leave enough time for a tour. We guarantee that this will be a very beautiful journey. It was signed by the editorial department of Novel Weekly. W.H. Lumion's eyes widened. Was this a reply from Novel Weekly? When did I say I wanted to attend the author's salon? Aurora leaned over and read the telegram. What's wrong with the editorial department of Novel Weekly? It's annoying having to meet so many people at once. Bertrand was well away from the door by now. Lumion was stunned and suddenly had a bold guess. The telegram in his hand was indeed a reply from Novel Weekly, but it was a reply to the telegram he would send in a few days. To be more precise, the telegram he had sent before going back in time had received a reply after the time reversal, and in his current experience, that telegram had yet to be sent out. Lumion reached a conclusion that if his guess was true, Cordoue and the surrounding area were the only places affected by the time reversal. Other places were not affected. Lumion's thoughts raced, wondering if leaving this place would allow him to return to his normal life. He turned to Aurora and pretended to be guilty. "Well, this telegram is my doing." "You?" Aurora was both angry and amused, but more importantly at a loss. She wondered if her brother had pranked her. This was akin to being pecked in the eye by an eagle despite being an experienced hunter. Lumion explained sincerely, "Here's the thing. Haven't I always wanted to go to Trier to take a look? So 2 days ago, I secretly sent a telegram to Novel Weekly at the telegraph office. I wrote it in your style to ask when the nearest author salon is. As expected, They warmly sent an invitation. Aurora showed a look of enlightenment, as though the mystery was finally solved. So that's how it is. The next second, she picked up a wooden stick beside her and gritted her teeth. So the child has grown up. Lumion quickly added, Aurora, no grande sir, listen to my excuses. No, listen to my explanation. He didn't panic, and even deliberately joked. Fine, go ahead, Aurora said as she held onto the wooden stick. I've always made sure that others accept any punishment with my best conduct. How can I convict someone without listening to the suspect's statement? Even if you are to die, I'll make sure you die knowing why. Lumion quickly said, in Intis, Trier has the most and best universities. I'm going to take the college entrance examination soon. And I want to visit them to decide which 3 to apply for. Aurora nodded slightly, indicating for Lumion to continue. Lumion praised his sister sincerely. I believe that as long as I make this legitimate request, you will definitely take me to Trier. However, you will have to spend your money. If Novel Weekly sends an invitation, not only will the steam locomotive ticket and hotel accommodation fees be reimbursed, but also various entertainment expenses in Trier. I know you don't need the money, but all the writing you've done was painstaking work, word after word. I won't let a way of saving money go to waste. Aurora's expression eased. At least you care about me. But have you considered that I don't want to attend an author salon? I hate interacting with so many strangers. Lumion smiled. Aurora. Grande sir. Have you thought that Novel Weekly invited you so warmly not to let you attend the salon, but to build a good relationship with you? You're a famous best-selling author. The salon isn't important. What's important is you. You can find a reason to reject the salon if you're willing to accept the invitation to visit Trier. The people at Novel Weekly will be glad that you accepted the first part of the invitation. Aurora sized up Lumion. You're getting better at reading people. She exhaled and said, All right, I'll handle some matters and pack our luggage. We'll leave for Trier in 2 days. Send a telegram to Novel Weekly before we leave, and ask them to pick us up at the Trier train station. All right. Lumion couldn't hide his joy. Although he suspected that it was impossible for him and Aurora to simply walk out of Cordu and find the corresponding source of the time reversal, he had to try. He couldn't trap himself in one place. Having such thoughts, he had tried to convince Aurora. Lumion didn't plan on telling Aurora about the time reversal because she had lost her corresponding memories. Lumion knew that it was unlikely that she would believe such a delusional speculation unless Lumion kept making prophecies that were eventually verified. However, he still pretended that he wasn't aware of the time reversal. He didn't plan on making prophecies for the time being to see if he could discover any clues. Using reading as an excuse, Lumion returned to the second floor and entered the study. He sat down and casually flipped open a book to confirm if he had it the right way up. Then he sank into his own thoughts, hoping to make further sense of the current situation through the various details he discovered last night and today. As his gaze shifted across the empty space, Lumion saw the lever blue on the table. His heart skipped a beat, and he retracted his thoughts. He stretched out his palm and took the lever blue, flipping through it quickly. The pages that were missing some words and had corresponding holes appeared before his eyes. That letter. Lumion muttered silently. He combined the Blate reply from Novel Weekly with the letter of help that Leah, Ryan, and the others had received, and he had a new guess. Perhaps that letter was really written by me. I'm the murderer. Time reversal might have happened more than once. According to the definition in Aurora's novel, this should be called a time loop. In a previous cycle, I discovered a certain abnormality through certain exploratory actions and decided to seek help from the outside world by sending an anonymous letter without implicating Aurora. By the time officials realized the seriousness of the problem and sent Ryan and the others to deal with it, Corda had already begun a new cycle. Like Aurora now, I lost all my corresponding memories and returned to my initial state. Now that begs the question, why are words still missing from this lever blue? Logically speaking, it should have returned to its initial state, just like the food I ate in the previous cycle. There are 2 possibilities. Firstly, if I discover an abnormality and ask for help before time starts to loop, then the relevant memories shouldn't be reset. Could there be another reason that caused me to lose a portion of my memories? This is getting more and more complicated. Secondly, I had found a way to keep something from being affected by the loop during that particular cycle. What could it be? If there is, why don't I just find a piece of paper and write down what I found? Lumion felt like he had cleared away a layer of fog and reconstructed the general situation, only to fall into even more confusion. He believed that he had already experienced many time loops. However, in the previous cycles, his memories and physical condition would reset once he started from the beginning, so he did not notice it at all. The reason why he could retain his memories, and the hunter-beyonder characteristic this time, was that he had met the lady and obtained the wand card. He had entered the dream ruins and activated the special trait in him. Since the special trait brought about by the two symbols allowed Lumion to bring his beyonder state in the dream to reality, it was completely possible for them to save his complete physical condition to the starting point of the cycle. Therefore, even after the shotgun monster's condition reset, it still failed to retrieve the hunter-beyonder characteristic. Lumion leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling as he slowly exhaled. He then laughed self-deprecatingly. I've just become a beyonder, but I have to face such abnormal things. I don't even get the time to develop. I can't confirm that the request for help was created by me. It might have been Aurora, and Madame Pualis is also a suspect. As beyonders, they might have sensed something amiss during a certain cycle and tried to save themselves. With their mysticism knowledge, it's easier for them to find a way to preserve some traces than I can. Nonetheless, a time loop is indeed the best guess for the current situation. As he pondered, Lumion realized a way to confirm the source of the letter. The solution was simple. He would enter the dream ruins and flip through the same lever blue at home. If the lever blue also had missing words, it meant that Lumion had created the letter of help himself. The home in the special dream was formed by his subconscious projection onto the mixed ruins. Everything he subconsciously knew would appear there. If not, then it was most likely done by Aurora or Madame Pualis. Lumion's subconscious wouldn't know about this, and wouldn't be responsible for it. Lumion wasn't in a hurry to catch up on his sleep. Seeing that it was about time, he sneaked out of the house and headed straight for Old Tavern. In the corner of Old Tavern, he spotted a familiar figure. It was the lady who had given him the wand card and potion formula. She was wearing a long orange pleated dress with a flounce collar and a light-colored frilly hat. Lumion heaved a sigh of relief, feeling like a drowning person who had finally caught a lifebuoy. He quickly walked over and noticed that there were not breakfast items on the table in front of the lady, but 3 stacks of tarot cards. Do you need me to draw a card? Lumion probed. You've already drawn it. The woman shuffled the 3 stacks of tarot cards without looking up. Lumion felt tears welling up in his eyes. As expected, she was not affected by the time loop. Without beating around the bush, Lumion sat down and asked directly, I, as well as the entire Corda village, have fallen into a time loop? The lady looked up and replied with a smile. Yes, you're one of the circle inhabitants. Lumion repeated the term circle inhabitants to himself, and asked in confusion, what does that refer to? People caught in a time loop. The lady smiled and said, there are 2 explanations. The first refers to people that obtained a special power equivalent to sequence 4 after praying to a certain existence. The second refers to your current situation. You can obtain strength by praying to a hidden existence. Lumion was very surprised by the first explanation of circle inhabitants. Wasn't it the case that all 22 Beyonder pathways relied on consuming potions to advance? The lady nodded slightly and said, in theory, the eternal blazing sun can also bestow the gift of Beyonder powers without the need for a potion. However, it is a burden to him. It can only be used as a temporary measure. The more people who need a blessing, the greater the burden. It might even affect his state. There are also disadvantages to those who are bestowed. They will slowly become closer to the eternal blazing sun, be it in body, mind, or spirit. Moreover, as it is a gift from a superior being, they can take it back at any time, unless you possess the unique power of certain pathways, and secretly complete a certain level of stealing, while still having the gift. Lumion paused for a moment, and then said, "So the body, mind, and spirit will approach the bestower, because the power of the gift carries a corresponding brand." He made this inference from the beyonder characteristics left behind by the oldest one and the previous owners. Although the bestowment was pure strength and didn't contain any characteristics, it was also likely to have been tainted with all the previous owner's quirks. The lady held the tarot cards and nodded in agreement. "Your logical ability is impressive. You should thank Aurora for giving you enough basic education." Lumion muttered inwardly, "No need for your reminder." The lady continued, "Even if the bestower doesn't wish to affect the bestowed, it's difficult to prevent the other party from approaching them physically, mentally, and spiritually. This is because if the power bestowed doesn't contain the bestower's will, it will be challenging for the bestowed to control it, and it will quickly dissipate. Therefore, the blessings of the orthodox gods in this aspect are basically temporary and limited to a certain extent. And the evil gods don't care what happens to the bestowed?" Lumion nodded thoughtfully and asked curiously, "Beyonders? What I mean is, can people with beyonder characteristics still accept gifts? Will the two conflict and cause them to lose control?" The lady smiled and shook her head. "There may be some conflict, but not much. Think about it. The power of the gift will transform your body to match that of the bestower, but your body has already adapted to your beyonder characteristics. So, there will be a conflict until you find a new balance. However, this conflict won't affect your mind or spirit, so you won't lose control unless you're on the brink of collapse. The only problem is that you might have to get used to seeing a third eye and a fourth hand growing on your body. Of course, the prerequisite is that the power bestowed on you will last for a long time. The corresponding level has to be very high as well. Otherwise, the little changes in your body can be ignored." Lumion acknowledged the information in a terse manner. "What if the gift is from the same or a neighboring pathway?" he asked. The lady nodded. "It won't cause any conflict." She then chuckled. "But that doesn't mean there won't be physical changes." "What does this mean?" Lumion was confused and was about to ask for clarification when the lady interrupted him with a chuckle. "I thought you'd be more interested in the time loop after learning about circle inhabitants. It's surprising that you're paying attention to this knowledge that may not be useful to you in the future." "That's not like you." Lumion revealed a self-deprecating smile. "I wanted to ask if you could help us break the time loop," he said. "But then I remembered what you said before. You claimed that the price for resolving the corresponding problem would be the complete destruction of Cordu. Everyone would die. If I wanted to achieve a better outcome, I could only rely on myself. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I can guess the reason. If you want to break the cycle, and you're not a circle inhabitant, the only way is to destroy everything." The lady nodded in agreement. "That's correct." Lumion was confused and asked, "Then why didn't you make it clear before? It's not like it's something that would lead to destruction." Or was this lady used to speaking in a half-concealed manner? The lady immediately laughed. "Would you have believed me if I had told you that the whole village was caught up in a time loop?" Lumion thought about it for a moment and replied, "Probably not." It was difficult to believe such an absurd story without experiencing it firsthand. The lady smiled and said, "That's why I didn't make it clear. I didn't want to spend a lot of time explaining it to you." Lumion fell silent for a moment before seizing the opportunity to ask, "Do you know what the key is to breaking this cycle? In what direction should I focus my efforts?" The lady shook her head. "Divination on certain matters is very dangerous here." "Ah." Lumion was confused. The woman could only add, "If I knew the key, I would tell you," the lady said. "The sooner I solve this, the sooner I can end this journey." She sighed. "When can I have a work-free vacation?" Work. Lumion couldn't obtain any inspiration from the mysterious lady, so he probed, "If the padre isn't killed, will time stop repeating itself?" "No," the lady replied accurately. "There are many trigger points in the loop, including time reaching the 12th night. You can figure out the rest yourself." 12th night. There's still quite a bit of time to investigate. Lumion thought for a moment and said, "Because I triggered the specialness in my body, I can maintain my memories and beyonder characteristics every time I loop, right?" Seeing the lady nod, he further asked, "So, as long as I'm alive and continue to investigate, I'll be able to find the key to end everything sooner or later. This was an application of the exhaustive method that Aurora had mentioned. In theory, that's right. The woman's emotive eyes, which puzzled Lummy and couldn't put his finger on, surfaced again. But you should have realized that only Cordu and the surrounding area are in a time loop. Time is passing normally in the outside world, and the date is completely different from Cordu's. The three investigators will send telegrams to describe their situation and the village, and the officials will sense the abnormality here once they mention the date. Even if the investigators fail to send a telegram before the cycle restarts, or they don't mention the date, as time passes, the officials will discover the problem. What do you think they will do to resolve the time loop in Cordu? Lumion fell silent for a moment before replying. They'll destroy it directly, just like your alternative choice. The lady nodded with mixed emotions. That can effectively prevent the abnormality from spreading and affecting others, she said. If you have the chance to go to the Sonia Sea in the future, you can ask about Bansi Harbor. It was destroyed by the Church of Storms, due to some kind of corruption. No one escaped. Lumion felt a renewed determination to find the key point of the loop on his own. He mocked himself, saying, "Looks like I don't have much time left." He knew he only had 3 or 4 more cycles, and he couldn't have it loop to the 12th night every time. The lady stood up and calmly said, "At least you still have a chance. Some people don't even have that." After leaving Old Tavern, Lumion stood on the road and looked at the few pedestrians and houses around him. Everything in Corda village seemed normal on the surface. The villagers had the same emotions as people everywhere: joy and anger, desire and longing. However, beneath the peaceful and noisy facade, this village hid an unimaginable horror. Everyone here had fallen into a loop and lived the same few days over and over again. Aside from a few people like Padre Guillaume Benet, Shepherd Pierre Barry, Pons Benet, and Ava Lizier, Lumion was temporarily unable to determine who was innocent. He wasn't even 100% sure that Raymond Gregg, who was usually rather dim and unscheming, was fine. The Padre's superpower may have influenced the lad's strange behavior at the end of Lent, instead of them having issues beforehand. For a moment, Lumion felt that Cordu was like a primitive forest, rife with unseen dangers. He couldn't tell who was the prey and who was the hunter. Caution and patience were most important to survive in such an environment. Ability, courage, wisdom, and experience had to take a back seat. This was somewhat similar to his vagrant days, yet clearly different. As these thoughts surfaced, he felt the hunter potion showing signs of digestion. This is the first step of the acting method. That's pretty fast. I thought it would take a month or 2 to start. He became excited at the possibility of digesting the hunter potion. Can I digest the hunter potion in 1 or 2 cycles? With the help of Dream Ruins hunting, he might quickly become a Sequence 8 provoker and increase his chances of solving the time loop problem. Lumion pondered as he walked forward. Soon he arrived at the village square. His current plan was to chat with the Padre to test him for abnormalities and obtain any clues. As he looked around, he saw a figure walking towards the cathedral. The figure was wearing a dark brown long coat with a hood, a rope tied around his waist, and a pair of brand new soft leather shoes. It was Shepherd Pierre Barry. "It's him." Lumion quickly approached Pierre and deliberately asked, "Pierre, why are you back?" Pierre's black curly hair was greasy, and he hadn't shaved for a long time. He happily replied, "Isn't Lent almost here? I haven't celebrated it in years. I can't miss it this year no matter what." His blue eyes were filled with a gentle smile, and he seemed completely different from the shepherd who had traumatized Lumion before. The answer will be somewhat different from the previous cycle, in a different place, with a different questioner. Although the essence doesn't change, certain words will be different. Lumion listened carefully and looked at Pierre's new shoes before asking, "Did you make it rich?" "Not really. I can only say that my current boss is not too shabby. He gave me quite a bit of things. Drinks are on me tonight." Pierre's joy was evident. "All right." Lumion agreed and pointed at the cathedral. "Are you going to pray?" Pierre sighed and said, "Yes, it's been too long since I prayed to God in a cathedral." Though the sentence didn't seem significant, the more Lumion listened, the more he sensed that something was off. Shepherds weren't entirely isolated from human settlements. Numerous villages were scattered around the plains and pastures. High mountain meadows might be desolate, but shepherds would occasionally descend the mountain to resupply. How could he not find a cathedral? Indeed, if Pierre Barry had ventured to Feyenopotter or Lemberg, locating the cathedral of the eternal blazing sun would be a fruitless endeavor. However, Lumion couldn't shake the feeling that there was something amiss in every word Pierre Barry uttered. Instead, Pierre Barry inquired, "Are you headed to the cathedral as well?" "No," Lumion replied, shaking his head. "I thought there'd be people chatting in the square, but it was empty." He then waved his hand. "I'm going home. See you tonight," Pierre Barry responded, waving back. After watching the shepherd head towards the cathedral, Lumion made his way back to the village. He decided against having a chat with the padre. His next destination, the home of shepherd Pierre Barry. Over a dozen members of the Barry family were crammed into a ramshackle two-story house. Lumion seemed unfazed by the open door and carefully maneuvered around it to the vacant area, enclosed by wooden fences at the back. Piles of hay and firewood were scattered near the eaves of the clearing, and 3 filthy, white sheep, muddied with dirt, were lingering there. Lumion remembered Aurora mentioning that the sheep Pierre had hurried back with seemed peculiar, but she couldn't quite pinpoint what was unusual about them. That's why Lumion had taken advantage of the shepherd's absence during prayer at the cathedral to inspect the sheep. Although he had never herded sheep himself, he had lived near the highland pastures in Cordoue, so he had at least encountered 70 to 80 sheep. He was by no means unfamiliar with them. After observing closely for some time, Lumion couldn't discern any differences between the 3 sheep before him and others of their kind. All he could do was mutter under his breath, "Can't see any issues with my naked eye. Do I need some superpower?" Sadly, hunters didn't possess such abilities. Lumion had already utilized his enhanced vision, sense of smell, and understanding of various clues, but he still couldn't identify any problems. The only oddity he noticed was that the sheep's droppings were piled in one corner, rather than scattered everywhere. Of course, there was a high probability that the Barry family regularly cleaned the area to use the feces more efficiently. After several more seconds of observation, Lumion murmured softly, "Looks like just looking and sniffing isn't enough. Do I need to get hands-on?" Without any hesitation, he placed his hand on the fence and flipped over it, as if he was right at home. The 3 sheep turned their heads simultaneously to look at Lumion, who greeted them with a grin. "Come on, time for a checkup." He wasn't concerned that their owner would discover his actions, since he had done similar things more than once. Every family in the village knew that this guy enjoyed playing pranks in various ways. Using sheep as props was just part of his antics. In Lumion's own words, "When your reputation is already tarnished, there are some perks to being infamous." With the title of Prankster King, anything he did in Cordoue village wouldn't arouse too much suspicion. Even if those who were clearly abnormal caught him red-handed, they wouldn't be able to confirm that something was amiss with him. Of course, under such circumstances, Padre Guillaume and Shepherd Pierre might try to silence him as a precautionary measure. As such, he needed to exercise caution when necessary. Bah! 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 As if sensing Lumion's ill intentions, the 3 sheep hid behind the haystack, their cries barely audible. But how could they escape a hunter? Lumion grabbed a sheep and patted its side while forcefully examining its teeth. "No issues here either," he whispered. Seeing the sheep look at him, he added with a wicked grin, "You're in excellent health. You'd probably make a delicious mutton stew with peas." He deliberately said this to test the intelligence of the 3 sheep. When there were no problems with the target's body, he could only start from this angle. The sheep's eyes glazed over momentarily. Lumion chuckled. "Pretty smart, huh? Do you understand what I'm saying?" The sheep's eyes returned to normal as it turned its head and began eating hay. "Ignoring me?" Lumion stroked his chin. "I'll buy you from Pierre Barry later and have you for dinner tonight." The sheep remained unresponsive. It bit off a piece of hay and yanked it out. The haystack suddenly collapsed, and Lumion's sharp hunter's eyes caught a glimpse of something. His expression darkened as he walked over and squatted down for a closer inspection. It was a bundle of black hair containing a few severed fingernails. Why would this be outside the house? Lumion muttered in surprise. As a native of Cordoue, He was well aware of the burial customs of the Darij region. When someone died at home, their hair and nails had to be cut and hidden somewhere inside the house to maintain their horoscope and good fortune. How could such an item appear in an outdoor haystack? Lumian picked up the bundle of hair and nails, weighing it as he examined it. It looks quite fresh, as if it had been cut only recently. He quickly made a judgment. However, no one had died in Korda village lately. Lumian could only suspect that this was some form of witchcraft similar to the funeral customs. He planned to consult his sister about it later. To avoid arousing suspicion, he stuffed the nails and black hair back into the haystack and restored the messy scene. Having completed that task, he walked towards the wooden fence. As Lumian took a few steps forward, he turned to look back at the 3 sheep. With a hopeful attitude, he muttered to himself, "Pierre Barry seems off. He's back in the village before May. Did he commit a crime outside? As a good citizen of Intis and a devout believer of God, should I visit Darij and inquire around?" The 3 sheep just stared at him, unresponsive and unchanged. Lumian sighed inwardly, feeling disappointed. These sheep aren't particularly intelligent, he thought. He then raised his hands, thumbs pointing up, index fingers pointing down, making a gesture of disdain. What's wrong with mocking the sheep when I'm in a bad mood? Suddenly, the sheep that Lumian had examined took a few steps forward, looking hopeful. It raised its hoof and started drawing on the mud. Lumian was momentarily stunned, but soon approached the sheep to see what it was drawing. The sheep seemed to be drawing letters on the ground. Lumian found them familiar, but didn't recognize them. He frowned and speculated, this language should have the same origin as Intisian, but I only know Intisian and some ancient Fasak languages. At that moment, Lumian realized the significance of Aurora's words, knowledge equals power. The sheep finished drawing and took a step back, looking at Lumian with sincerity in its eyes. The other 2 sheep also had a similar emotional change and bleated softly. Lumian looked at the word on the ground and fell into deep thought, wondering what it meant and how he should respond. In just a second or two, he had an idea and nodded solemnly at the 3 sheep. He stretched out his right foot and wiped away the word on the soil. He may not understand, but he could pretend to understand it. He would trick the sheep for now and ask his sister for guidance later. Without waiting for the sheep to respond, he nodded slowly with a heavy and thoughtful expression as he walked towards the fence, as if saying, "Be patient, I'll figure something out." After leaving the sheep pen, Lumian didn't waste any time and went straight home. He found Aurora, reading on a recliner in the study. "Grande, sir," he called out anxiously. "There's something." Aurora immediately raised her guard. "Calling me Grande, sir? What kind of trouble did you get into this time?" Lumian took a deep breath and organized his thoughts. "Remember when you said there was something off about Shepherd Pierre Barry's 3 sheep? Well, I went to the back of his house to take a look while he was praying in the cathedral. And guess what I found?" Aurora's expression turned serious. "If you're going to do something like that, you need to tell me in advance. It's dangerous now, and no one will protect you." Lumian felt touched by his sister's concern but complained, "If I told you in advance, you probably wouldn't have let me go." "I'll keep it in mind for next time," he promised sincerely. He had said similar words dozens of times. Aurora understood the urgency of the situation and nodded, indicating that Lumian could tell her what he had discovered. Lumian quickly recounted his experience in the sheep pen. The more Aurora listened, the more serious she became. "Write down that word," she said, getting up from the recliner and finding a pen and paper to hand to Lumian. Lumian had memorized the word, so he quickly wrote it down on the paper. Aurora took a quick glance and said solemnly, "This is a big problem." "I know," Lumian responded inwardly. Moreover, he believed the problem was even bigger than his sister had imagined. "What's the problem?" he asked. Aurora pointed at the word and said, "This is Highlander, the official language of the Fainapotter Kingdom. Like Intisian, it comes from ancient Fasak. It means—" Aurora paused for a moment, then spoke in a deep voice, "Help! Help!" Lumian blurted out in surprise. "The sheep are asking us for help," Aurora tersely acknowledged. "I suspect they're not really sheep. They were probably humans." "Humans?" Lumian asked in shock. This was beyond the scope of what he knew. Before, Lumian had only thought that the three sheep were intelligent and had human-like emotions. They also seemed to have mastered some human language, but he had never thought of them as actual humans. To him, turning into a sheep only happened in imaginative stories. Just as he said that, Lumian was no longer shocked. He realized that a time loop had already happened. What was so strange about people turning into sheep? In the world of mysticism, there were plenty of bizarre and absurd things. Aurora solemnly nodded at her brother's confusion and said, "I'm not sure if there's a secret art that can turn a person into a sheep, but all the details now point to that possibility." Indeed, Lumian echoed. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that the three sheep were probably humans. Did this mean that the shepherd, Pierre Barry, was actually grazing humans? Lumian then asked, "Why were those nails and hair hidden outside the house?" Aurora pursed her lips and said, "This is one of the funerary customs of the Darige region. However, it's not used under normal circumstances. Many people have forgotten about it. As a warlock, I've studied this aspect to see if I could obtain some useful knowledge." She then explained, when a family member commits suicide, or is murdered by a relative, or if they had a bad character while alive and exerted a negative influence on the entire family, the hair and nails that are cut after death have to be hidden outside the house to prevent the family's horoscope from being affected and bringing them bad luck. Suicide or murder by a relative. Lumian suddenly thought of something. During the last cycle, Pons Benet entered Naroka's house without adhering to the funeral customs. Could he have gone to take away Naroka's hair and nails? If Pons Benet had really entered Naroka's house to take away her hair and nails, there's a high chance that Naroka had been murdered by a relative. After all, Naroka had a good reputation and was the pillar of the entire family. Furthermore, she was relatively healthy, both physically and mentally, so it was unlikely that she had committed suicide. Lumian quickly came up with a series of speculations. But if Naroka had really been murdered by a relative, what was the reason? Seeing that her brother was deep in thought and hadn't spoken for a long time, Aurora thought that he was frightened by the idea of humans turning into sheep and someone from the Barry family dying from murder. So she comforted him gently. "Although the matter is serious, it doesn't affect us yet. I need to reflect on such matters. It's easy for you to panic when you encounter something similar, if you're always prohibited from coming into contact with real mysticism." The frequency of supernatural events has been increasing in recent years, and I can't be by your side at all times. You'll grow up and have your own life. Lumian inwardly retorted that he had never heard of someone having to leave the family when they grew up. He could feel that Aurora's attitude toward him coming into contact with mysticism had loosened up due to the matter of humans turning into sheep. If I work harder, I can directly tell her that I've become a beyonder, Lumian thought, but before he could speak, Aurora had already made her decision. "Go pack your bags now. We'll leave Cordu immediately using Novel Weekly's invitation. We're really lucky. They sent us a telegram at the critical moment, so that we can leave openly without being suspected. When we're on our journey, I'll teach you some true mysticism, but don't even think about becoming a beyonder. It's too dangerous." Lumian silently muttered to himself, "We're not lucky. I sent the telegram because I discovered the problem. We only received a reply in this cycle." But he was pleased that his sister was still the same decisive person. Although he didn't think they could successfully leave Corda village or escape the loop, he had to try. Aren't we going to save those three people?" Lumian asked. Aurora shook her head. "This could trigger a conflict between us and Pierre Barry. And I'm not sure how strong he is or how many helpers he has. It's too dangerous to save others without knowing anything. It's better to let the officials do it. This is their duty. When we reach Darige and buy steam locomotive tickets, we'll send an anonymous letter to the officials and let them handle it. But what if they don't believe us?" Lumian deliberately pressed. Aurora smiled. "In terms of mysticism, you are indeed illiterate. In the letter, we'll describe the matter of turning people into sheep clearly. They will naturally find professionals to perform divination. Even if they don't obtain any detailed revelations, they will discover that there's something abnormal about Cordu." "Got it," Lumian said. and he went upstairs to pack his bags. Not long after, the siblings each came down with a brown suitcase. Aurora looked out the door and said, "Let's go to Madame Pouali's and borrow her carriage to reach Dirige as quickly as possible." An ordinary person had to walk an entire afternoon from Corda village to Dirige. As a hunter, Lumion didn't need to, but in Aurora's eyes, he wasn't a beyonder yet. After hesitating whether he should take the opportunity to confess to his sister, he realized that it was impossible for him to escape from Cordu. He might as well take the opportunity to search Madame Pouali's house for clues. Lumion tersely acknowledged, "Will do," and reached out to take his sister's suitcase. With 2 pieces of luggage in hand, he headed for the door. Aurora nodded in satisfaction and relief, but then she said in puzzlement, "Your strength has increased. You're carrying it so easily." She subconsciously wanted to raise her right hand and rub the sides of her eyes, but Lumion had already left. She could only give up and quickly follow. On the way to the administrator's residence, many villagers saw Aurora leaving with her luggage and asked about the situation curiously. Aurora, who had a valid reason, was very calm about this. On the other hand, Lumion came up with 7 or 8 stories to deal with the different villagers. Something about Aurora getting the Intis Legion of Honor medal and going to Trier to be honored. Something about him being specially recruited by Trier Normal College and being able to be matriculated. Or something about Aurora going bankrupt from investing in stocks with her creditors about to come knocking on her door, leaving her with no choice but to flee to other places. The ignorant villagers were stunned when they heard this, but thanks to Lumion's reputation, they chose not to believe him after coming back to their senses. Not long after, the siblings arrived in front of the black building that had been transformed from an ancient castle. Looking up at the 2 tall towers, Lumion smiled and said, "I wonder what's inside." "Aurora, have you ever been inside? Why would I wander around someone else's house?" Aurora rolled her eyes at her brother. Lumion muttered softly, "I thought Madame Pouali's would invite you to tour the castle. Don't people like them like to show their guests their big houses and precious collections? What's there to see?" Aurora's voice became softer and softer as she thought about how this would be of great help to her description of a castle in her works. "Sigh, let's talk about it in the future. I wonder if we can still return to Cordu." She then led Lumion through the colorful garden towards the castle door. After taking a few steps, Aurora slowed down and looked around. She remarked in puzzlement, "The flowers in this garden bloomed very early." Corda village was in the mountains, and there was a Highlander pasture nearby. Normally, the first wave of spring flowers would only appear in mid to late April. "Perhaps Madame Pouali's gardener has a special method," Lumion said. He recalled that Madame Pouali's was a beyonder of an abnormal pathway, and suspected that this was related to some supernatural phenomenon. But he couldn't say it out loud. Aurora was just making an offhand remark, so she didn't think too deeply about it. They arrived at the castle and received a warm welcome from Madame Pouali's. The lady was wearing a blue corset dress today, and there was still a diamond necklace inlaid with gold hanging over her chest. Her long brown hair was half tied up, the rest cascading down, making her look even younger than usual. She sat on an armchair in the small living room and quietly listened to Aurora's request. She smiled and said, "You don't have to be so polite. We're friends." Heh, Lumion mocked in his heart. Who would introduce crappy marriage partners to a friend? But he quickly saw Madame Pouali's looking at him with a smile in her bright brown eyes. He suddenly recalled their previous conversation and felt uncomfortable. "All right," Aurora said helplessly. Every time she borrowed a carriage, she would offer to pay for it, but Madame Pouali's would always refuse. So she would usually bring some gifts for the lady on the way back, which were neither expensive nor cheap, and also give the carriage driver a tip. While waiting for the carriage driver to prepare, Madame Pouali's invited the siblings to taste some desserts made by her own chef. Lumion tasted a muffin and looked around. "Where's Monsieur Lund?" Louis Lund was Administrator Beast's butler. He had followed him from Dirige to Corda village. Lumion had evidence that he had an affair with a woman in the village and had sold some of the castle's items secretly. This was how he got the news that Madame Pouali's was the mistress of the Padre. Chancing upon the Padre and Madame Pouali's having an affair in the cathedral? That was a lie for the foreigners. At this moment, Lumion was looking for Louis Lund to curse him, saying, "You son of a b*****, why didn't you tell me that Madame Pualis is a warlock?" Madame Pualis sighed. "Louis is sick. He's resting in his room." Sick. For some reason, Lumion felt that there might be a problem. While his sister was chatting with Madame Pualis, he excused himself to go to the washroom, walked out of the living room, and went straight to the stairs. This castle was huge, and the couple didn't bring many servants with them. It looked empty everywhere, and one could even hear echoes when walking in certain places. This gave Lumion better conditions to infiltrate. Relying on his powerful senses, he easily dodged a valet and a maid. With light footsteps, he arrived at the second floor and found Louis Lund's room. He was in no hurry to knock. He turned his head and pressed his ear to the wood. Ah! Ah! Sounds of a man screaming in pain came from the room. Is he really sick? It sounds quite serious. Lumion thought for a moment and walked to the side. He opened the door of the other servants. Administrator Beast and Madame Pualis lived on the third floor. After darting into the room, he gently closed the wooden door, took a few steps to the other side, and pushed open the glass window. Lumion looked down and saw that no one was around. He immediately propped himself up with both hands and nimbly flipped over, hanging on the outer wall of the castle. Then, he leaped lightly like a wild cat, and silently landed on Butler Louis Lund's windowsill. Lumion stood at the edge of the glass window, turned his body, and secretly looked into the room. He saw Louis Lund lying naked on the bed, his belly bulging, giving the impression that he might burst at any moment. Seeing that the butler's black hair was drenched in sweat, and his face was grimacing with pain, Lumion couldn't help but frown when he heard his tragic cries from time to time. What kind of illness is this? It looks scary. A stomach can actually grow so big. At this moment, a woman in her 40s stood beside Louis Lund's bed. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She was pretty and didn't have many wrinkles. She wore a grayish-white dress, and was shouting excitedly at Louis Lund. Soon. What's happening soon? Just as this thought flashed through Lumion's mind, he heard a scream, and saw something holding up Louis Lund's stomach. In the blink of an eye, that spot had burst open. Louis Lund's stomach had burst. A small, bloody hand reached out. It's born! It's born! The woman shouted happily. She then leaned down and took out a wrinkled, dirty, and bloody baby from Louis Lund's stomach. Lumion was stunned. Compared to the time loop and humans becoming sheep, the scene in front of him was no less shocking. It made Lumion feel as though his eyes, mind, and spirit had been severely tainted. If he had known beforehand that he would witness such a thing, he would definitely have abandoned his actions. What the F***ck is going on? Louis Lund is clearly still a man. Whose child is he carrying? The administrators? Or Madame Pualis? Is this the world of mysticism? Aurora didn't let me come into contact with this for my own good. For a moment, Lumion's thoughts were disordered, and his mind was in a state of chaos. He wished he could dig out his eyes and forcefully forget what he had seen. Wah! 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 The baby that Louis Lund had given birth to cried out, making the filthy delivery room instantly have a holy aura. This was the beauty of a new life. Lumion, who was hiding outside the window, directly experienced the joy of human origins. Of course, besides that, the strange, absurd, dirty, and disharmonious feeling became even more obvious. Lumion finally came back to his senses, and subconsciously looked into the room again. The baby had already been placed on a white silk cloth beside Louis Lund by the woman in the grayish-white dress. The baby was a boy, and there was more blood than milky white fat, but other than that, there was nothing abnormal. He looked like an ordinary newborn. Lumion observed for another 2 seconds, and realized that the baby boy's 10 fingers were bent. His nails were very long like the claws of a bird. Just now, he had used these hands to rip open Louis Lund's stomach. Louis Lund, on the other hand, lay in a semi-conscious state. The wound on Louis Lund's stomach had yet to be stitched up, and blood kept seeping out. One could vaguely see the intestines pressed to the side and a strange, bird's nest-like thing covered in a flesh-colored membrane. As the woman wrapped the baby in silk, she picked up a sewing needle and catgut, and began chanting as she sewed the groaning Louis Lund's wound. This was quite easy for you. The last time I gave birth to quadruplets, that was considered painful. Lumien's facial muscles twitched slightly. He felt that after his eyes, brain, mind and spirit were affected, his ears were also tainted. He retracted his gaze. He had to get out of there fast. He leaped back to the window he had come from and flipped into the room. After closing the window, he rushed out the door and headed straight for the stairs. After dodging a male servant, Lumien tiptoed and quickly returned to the hall. Where did you go? Suddenly, a slightly magnetic and gentle voice sounded in his ears. Even with Lumien's hunter senses, he didn't sense that someone was standing beside the staircase entrance. He turned around to see Madame Pualis in a blue corset, her hair half-tied, and her bright brown eyes reflecting his figure. The madame no longer had a smile on her face. Her eyes reflected Lumien's figure with a piercing intensity. Lumien's mind tensed up. He was terrified, but prepared to fight if necessary. Aurora appeared from a side room and asked, "Where did you go?" "The carriage has been waiting at the entrance." Having been in a similar situation, the experienced Lumien said half-truthfully, "Didn't Madame Pualis say that Monsieur Lund is sick? I had drinks with Monsieur Lund and wanted to visit him. But this castle is too big. I couldn't find his room." Aurora nodded and said, "You could have asked Madame Pualis directly. You don't have to hide it from us. It's not a bad thing." "My bad. I'm sorry." Lumien looked at Madame Pualis sincerely. After seeing the scene upstairs, Lumien was more afraid of this lady than disgusted. He was relieved when she finally smiled, no longer as serious as before. "Let me thank you on behalf of Lund for your kindness, but he isn't in the best of health. He isn't willing to appear in front of others in that unseemly manner." "It's indeed unseemly." Lumien silently echoed her thoughts. "Shall we board the carriage?" "Thank you so much," Aurora said to Madame Pualis. Lumien watched Madame Pualis closely, afraid she would find a way to make them stay longer. If she did, it could mean that she sensed something had happened with Louis Lund. Although Lumien felt that their combined forces could fight against Madame Pualis after he rendezvoused with his sister, this was her castle after all, surrounded by her servants. It was the worst hunting environment for a hunter. Madame Pualis nodded and smiled at Aurora. "I look forward to the gifts you bring back from Trier. I always yearn for what's trending there. I hope I can give you a surprise," Aurora replied, though she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to return to Corda Village. She just needed to keep up appearances. Madame Pualis walked the siblings to the door with her lady's maid, Kathy, and watched them get into the four-seater carriage. The burly, brown-bearded carriage driver wore dark red clothes, yellow pants, and a waxed hat. He looked almost like a professional coachman in the city, except that he didn't wear a tie. This was a mandatory request from Administrator Beast. Aurora apologized to the driver. "Sorry to trouble you," she said politely before closing the door. The driver's name was Sewell, and he had the most common blue eyes in the Intis Republic. He was delighted by Aurora's politeness and looked forward to the tip he'd receive when they arrived in Dirige. "Madam, Monsieur, sit tight." He raised his whip, and the horses started to speed up. As the carriage passed through Corda Village, it suddenly stopped. Lumien's heart skipped a beat, knowing that their journey wouldn't be smooth and easy. "What's wrong?" he asked the driver Sewell. Sewell explained, "Madam promised to send Naroka to Junak village yesterday. I'm worried I won't be able to return in time after going to Dirige, so I thought of picking her up on the way. Don't worry, it won't cause any delays." Junak village was closer to Dirige than Corda village. Going there first really didn't affect the estimated time of arrival for Aurora and Lumien. Aurora had no right to object since this wasn't her carriage, so she didn't. Lumien was more concerned about Naroka's safety. In the previous cycle, she had died under suspicious circumstances, possibly at the hands of a relative. It was related to the Padres group. Sewell went into Naroka's house before helping her out. Naroka was different from usual. She was dressed in a long black dress with exquisite patterns and a dark bonnet. Her sparse, pale hair was carefully combed. "Hey, my little cabbages, where are you going?" Naroka asked happily as she got into the carriage. Her pock-marked and wrinkled face was filled with unconcealable joy, and her previously slightly turbid eyes were much more energetic. Aurora told her the truth. "I'm going to Trier to attend an author salon. And also bring Lumian to check out the universities there. Aurora asked Naroka, "Did you receive some invitation?" While it was normal for Naroka to wear black clothes as a widow, she only wore this dress during festivals, banquets, and the anniversary of her late husband's death. Naroka looked expectant. "Yeah, to meet some people." Lumian quietly observed Naroka, trying to see if he could detect anything from her. The carriage started moving again, leaving Korda village behind. Aurora chatted with Naroka intermittently, keeping an eye on the outside of the carriage. Aurora worried that their sudden departure might arouse suspicion. As they continued on, Lumian sensed a change in Naroka's demeanor. She looked much paler than before, and her eyes lacked their usual liveliness. She only spoke when spoken to. This was very similar to the Naroka Lumian had seen in the middle of the night during the previous cycle. Lumian discreetly tugged on Aurora's hand to get her attention. Aurora turned to him, silently asking what was wrong. Lumian discreetly pointed at Naroka and drew a cross on her palm, a symbol Aurora often used to indicate an error in her scripts. He used it to refer to Naroka's concerning state. Aurora was momentarily stunned, but quickly understood what Lumian meant. She turned her attention to Naroka, sensing that something was wrong. Aurora raised her hand to massage her temples, causing her light blue eyes to darken and become deeper. With just a glance, Aurora's golden brows furrowed, and she leaned back slightly as if she had been hit by something. She closed her eyes and rubbed her temples, as if she was feeling tired and in pain. When she opened her eyes again, Aurora turned to Lumian and said, "When we reach Dirige, you must stay close to me. No matter what happens, don't leave my side." Her tone was serious, and Lumian understood immediately. He knew that if something happened, he had to follow his sister closely. She would take care of it. He nodded solemnly and decided to tell Aurora about his recent Beyonder powers later. Aurora turned her attention back to Naroka and asked, "Are you really going to Junak, or somewhere else?" She was worried that an unexpected stop might make things more complicated. It was better to anticipate any developments and not fight in an environment the other party was expecting. Naroka's gaze was vacant as she replied in a deep voice, "No, I'm not going to Junak. I want to go to Permitha." As she spoke, Lumian noticed the outside of the carriage window darkening abnormally.